Hey folks, Loman02. Going to be doing another Canadian Highlander video here. The deck you have in front of you is red deck wins, just pretty much pure and simple red deck wins. There are a couple distinctions that you can see in multiple separate builds across the format, but it is quite distinct from a deck like Medium Red, where you're running a Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Mana Vault type spread, 9-pointer spread. So, if you're interested in only gameplay, I am going to have some gameplay for this. Please jump down to the end. I actually just recently kind of got done doing a hot wash over this deck, so there are going to be some different cards you'll see in some of the gameplay. Because I hadn't revisited it in a while. And I kind of wanted to, because it's kind of one of those, it's kind of like an every format staple, maybe outside of, Vintage. There's always, a good red deck. And I also think it's a good entry point for folks into Canadian Highlander because, in general, outside of the fetch lands, the Black Lotus, and the Mox Ruby in this deck, which if cost is a bar to entry, but you don't have a high predilection on what you play in a format, you don't need Black Lotus and Mox Ruby in this deck. They definitely make it better, but you don't need it. And honestly, in some matches, they're even a liability more than they are a boon. And they're not great late game draws, etc. But for the opening hands where you have them, they tend to be very strong. But this is a good entry point for a lot of players into this format, so I thought it was definitely a deck worth going back through. It's also a top competitor. It's a very, very good deck. I'm not going to promise this is the best deck. There are aficionados of this type of play that only play red deck wins, that possibly have more tuned lists. I think this list is good. I've done pretty well with it. It's very good at its job. And I spent some time on it, so I don't think it's a bad list. I think it's probably an over 90th percentile list. Maybe 85th is more accurate, but I think it's also quite strong and what it does to do. And then also, again, there's a lot of fluctuation to what right is, because each of these, there are differences and distinctions in how you build red deck wins. Generally what it circulates around is land count, creature count. And when I say creature count, it's creature count versus spell count. This is a fairly neutral bias build of it with 36 creatures. I would say the most neutral bias is probably 33. You go, a third lands, a third creatures, a third spells. This has a few more creatures in it because I wanted to equity build a couple powerful spells that I think were just worth playing, namely Reckless Abandon, Collateral Damage, and then some pump spells, Brute Force, and Mutagenic Growth, because I think they're very good. Especially being, basically 3 damage plus burn spells and or free shocks. So all that said, if you want to see gameplay, please go down to the comments section. There will be a link there. I'm going to actually cover this deck, and you'll have to kind of go through it with me, guys. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so my voice is a little bit froggy, and I may be coughing a bit during it, but I'll try at a minimum to mute my mic when that comes up. So this is a low land count red deck wins deck. I think most players who played Magic have probably seen a red deck wins at some point. This one's pretty much an archetypical build of what you would expect in that archetype. Very efficient threats, looking to end the game quickly. This is possibly a little faster than what you'd see in a standard run, or maybe even modern. Probably about the same speed as modern burn decks. You're looking to turn 3 to turn 4 people. Turn 4 is probably more accurate, but you have turn 2 potential in this deck because you're playing cards like Black Lotus, Chrome Mox, and Mox Ruby. And you're playing cards like Fire Blast, etc. So you have some cards that are a little bit faster. But you also have to account for a little bit more than you do in a standard run or even in modern. Because there are very powerful decks, especially in format with Black Lotus, Mox Ruby. I mean, there's Tendrils decks that are probably more consistent turn 3 to turn 4 decks than red deck wins is. So you need to have some disruption. You need to have the ability to interact with your opponent. But primarily, the deck's game plan is very linear. It's very focused on its own game plan, and any resiliency that is built into it is done so in addition to augmenting or promoting its primary game plan. For instance, when I say that, what I kind of mean is, let me pull up the card preview panel before we start talking independent cards. It's you see a card like Sulfuric Vortex, you play this really for disruption. This card's not fast. It's tougher to deal with because it's an enchantment. Sure, that's a decent point, but I mean, you have Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy in formats now. You play this card just because it's one, hard to deal with, and two, it's a means of inevitability in a deck that does not oftentimes accrue long-term advantage or have what would be typical means of card advantage in it. So, I mean, Sulfuric Vortex in a way is basically card advantage because it's disrupting your opponents from doing something that would directly inhibit your game plan from being promoted. What I mean by that is, like, your opponent casts Timely Reinforcements. Like, it's bad on many levels when they cast a card like that. Timely Reinforcements, if you're not familiar, is a white and 2 sorcery speed card that, if you have less creatures than your opponent, make 3 1/1 white soldier tokens, and if you have less life than your opponent, gain 6 life. That's a card that is utterly a ranching when you're playing this style of deck. But if you have a card like Sulfuric Vortex, you can turn that card into nothing. I mean, maybe they're still going to get 1/1s, which is still really bad for you, but they haven't gained any life, and you still have Sulfuric Vortex on the board. Or like cards like that are a little more subtle, like On-Crop Crasher. Like, I don't think folks would typically think of this card as like a disruptive card, but I tend to. Honestly, it's a little bit overrated. Not overrated. It costs a little bit much for the body. Like 3 mana, unless you're playing like Ancient Tombs and stuff like that. Like 3 mana, like 2 and 1 red for 3 damage is quite a bit. Because, I mean, this deck is very specifically kind of playing by philosophy of fire. And what I mean by that is, like, each of my cards need to, in some way, shape, or form, including the land average of the deck, compute into some amount of damage. And for this deck, it's around 2.5. I want my cards to all do it a minimum 2.5, per card, and ideally per mana. So, like, On-Crop Crasher, I'm kind of hoping to get 2 hits in with it, is kind of like where my math goes. So it's a little bit overcosted for what I'm trying to do as far as the rate at which I pay for the damage output of the card itself, but because it allows me to retain card relevance of cards that may have become irrelevant due to onboard blockers like Courser of Crewfix or Tireless Tracker or, Wall of Omens, whatever. I can play this On-Crop Crasher, and then my 2/2s and my 2/1s, from turns 1 and 2 can still get through and actually do damage. So it builds equity in those cards, whilst disrupting my opponent from, building equity in their own cards, like similar to the ones that I just mentioned. Same thing with like Rampaging Frost. Now this is disruption in a more obvious way. You're not gaining life, and if you're playing a creature combo deck, you can't do that because if you're going to recurse a bunch of creatures, you'll just take a ton of damage. Eidolon of the Great Revel. This card sees play in pretty much most red decks that can run it, across the formats that run red decks. That said, it kind of has a more special place in this deck specifically because Storm is such a big deal. I guess like in Legacy, Storm's a pretty big deal too. In Modern, I don't think it sees as much play anymore, but it could. This card just hoses decks where spells matter. It just gets them. Ash Zealot, the decks that are going to reanimate massive threats against you are just going to do it, but there's actually a significant number of decks that will just have like cards that flash back or that you cast in the graveyard. Whether it be like Mystical Teachings, whether it be Faithless Looting, whether it be Snapcaster Mage, because you're technically giving a spell flashback with it. This card just randomly kind of gets some incremental chip damage in from that, and it's also just a good-sized body for 2 red mana. First Strike is also just a great ability to have on red cards, because not a ton of them have it, and when they do, it's quite good. Skullcrack, yep, pretty obvious reasons. Stop life gain prevention. They cast the Thragtusk out, you just prevent that life gain. Yeah, quite good. Harsh Mentor, card is just very strong. So, like, Time Vault combo is probably one of the top decks in the form. Some variation of Time Vault combo, like a control combo deck, a hybrid control combo deck, is one of probably the top decks. And Harsh Mentor ensures that's turned off, because basically for the Time Walk loop to work, in general you're going to have some sort of key, like a Voltaic key, a Manifold key. It could even be a Voltaic Servant, which would actually change the math I'm about to do for you, plus Time Vault. So you're untapping this thing, which is 2 activated abilities, excepting the Voltaic Servant, which is a triggered ability at end step. So you're taking 4 damage per cycle, or 2 damage in the example of Voltaic Servant, which ostensibly you could also burn if like you knew that was the card they're going to use, which sometimes you have the opportunity to know because they have to transmute or tutor for stuff that gets revealed in the format. But anyways, Harsh Mentor is pretty good against that style of combo. It also kind of gets fetch lands. It gets a significant number of things that can be problematic over time. Again, this card is overcosted for what it does. I mean, it doesn't have haste. It's 2/2 with no evergreen abilities. Not really a great creature in and of itself, but the fact that fetch lands are so prevalent in the format, there's a top deck that this card can kind of just single-handedly hose if they don't remove it, which they can. Like, most of those decks do have interaction for the board. Some don't, but most do. It's quite good. So Harsh Mentor, just in here, it's disruptive, though. That's what it's here for. Ursera Canra, this is in pretty much most red decks that... Basically, if you're playing red cards and you're even remotely aggressive, you're playing this card, you're probably not playing it in all red decks. I mean, there's like Blue Moon and stuff like that, but this card's quite good. I mean, the fact that it has the 6 mana ability, Eternalize, to come back as a 4/4, is great. You're not oftentimes going to do that in this deck, but it's not irrelevant either because we're a Black Lotus deck. Sometimes these type of effects, like Eternalize, can become relevant late game because you just like late game draw your Black Lotus and dump it and then Eternalize this goofball and kill him. It's kind of funny how that works out, but anyways, I put this in the disruption pile because I mean it's still a great threat, but the fact that you can prevent something from blocking early is quite strong. Alright, a Braid, yeah, just hits artifacts. This is quite good. I would be playing this if it only hit creatures. 2 mana for 3 damage to a creature is a very expensive rate, but the flexibility that this card affords, being able to hit artifacts, anything from Platinum Empyrean, which can just end your game if they resolve it, you can't deal with it, to a Time Vault itself, or a Signet, whatever it might be, and the fact that you can also just remove a relevant mana dork like a Rofellos or something like that, or even like a white card that is problematic that has first strike like Thalia, Stoneforge Mystic, etc. Grim Lavamancer, again, like mana dorks are pretty big in the format as well. Being able to kind of chip away at those, can also just seal up a long game too. If you kind of get into a weird stall where like they're unable to attack you, but you're also unable to attack them. Like generally that's going to happen because they're at such a low life total. By turning anything sideways, they're going to die to your board, or if you draw a haster, they're going to die to your board. This card can just kind of incrementally chip up if they're already at like 4 to 6 or something like that. You can generally get there with it. Wasteland, pretty much the most ubiquitous card probably across the format. It's probably the most played card in the most decks in the format. For good reason too. Like Wasteland is just such a massive, like in a deck like this, like you're playing it pretty much how you'd expect. Like people like the level 1 play of Wasteland, like just buy time. Now you're not generally going to level 1, like not going to turn 1 them with Wasteland. You're going to present your pressure, but like turn 2, turn 3, slam a Wasteland. Like if you have 2 1-drops with a mountain and a Wasteland, slam your mountain turn 1, play your threat out, slam your Wasteland, blow up their land, play another 1-drop, and then just go from there. Because I mean, if they trip up at all, like generally that's kind of the benefit to one of these decks too. This deck's hyper consistent. And not much is generally going to go wrong for it in the early game. It's an early game deck, and as much as you can make go wrong for your opponent in the early game, the better off, the more equity you build into your win, right? Like your win percent with the deck. So Wasteland kind of does that for you, and it's just playing it at level 1. You're not looking to like per se hit utility lands with it. Sometimes you do, like if they get an early Tolarian Academy and you blow it up, you can kind of just strand a bunch of stuff in their hand and beat them to death over the course of 2 turns. But yeah, it's just very, very powerful. As a disruption, I'll also kind of include Fiery Confluence, but I put it over here in the card advantage pile because I do think there are some card advantage components to Red Deck wins that are worth talking about and kind of like why you would play these cards over maybe like another good, lightning bolt-like effect in the deck. But Fiery Confluence, a ton of damage if you want, but also blows up the artifacts. Artifacts are really big in the format. Go figure, it's an eternal format. Every card that's vintage legal is legal in the format. So, having a way to deal with them, especially at advantage like this, is quite nice. And the fact that this card also promotes your primary game plan by being able to just kill someone, and or being a Wrath, because like there are times where like you'll be chomping away and like you'll lose all your threats to removal or blocks, and you'll be looking to burn them out, and maybe 6 is not quite enough, but doing 1 to all their mana dorks plus 4 to their face is enough to like get a good top deck in the following turn. So, I think Fiery Confluence is disruption. I think it's also pretty much card advantage. All right, let's kind of cover the rest of the way I got this deck organized. So you got lands over here. You've got a ton of mountains. Well, I guess not a ton. It's only 16. It's a pretty land-light deck, being at 28. It may actually be richer than like you would think it would need to be based on the combined CMC, which is kind of hard to ascertain with how the deck is laid out right now. But I often find that like Red Deck wins, unlike more so like permanent based aggressive decks, like decks that have like 44 plus creatures, like White Weenie, Sui Black, those style decks tend to run less lands. They can get away with running less lands because like they're going to be cast. Their need to cast 2 spells or 2 spell is going to not be as high as this deck is. You just often really need your mana with this deck. Like this deck does not translate better over time. Whereas, like, some of those permanent-based decks, like, you just get more advantage out of a permanent source of damage, right? Like, they're easier to interact with, they're easier to disrupt, but, they present good equity over time. Whereas, like, some of the spells in this deck are very timely. Like, they just need to happen. So, like, your mana reliance is very high. So you want it to be right every time. You want it to work every time right. Because when it doesn't, like, you don't want to be the deck to trip up. This deck is not the one that wants to trip up. If it doesn't trip up, it's going to generally win, and if they trip up, it'll pretty much always win as long as you're mulliganing the hands that function. So that's why there's the kind of the larger land count, but not the 28's even large. Like, it's, I think, pretty reasonable for the build. You also have all the available fetch lands in red. Why would you want fetch lands in this deck? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's a couple of reasons. You have cards like Barbarian Ring, which is over here in the card advantage pile, which require Threshold, and then you have Grim Lavamancer, which we actually already talked about. That's really it. I have to look. I mean, as we're going through, maybe I'll notice something else that actually cares about the graveyard. I mean, there's cards that care about the graveyard, but I don't think it's about size. But those cards do. So, they are definitely cards that are worth running in the deck. Alright, so then we have Mox Ruby, Chrome Mox, and Black Lotus. This is the mana acceleration pile. Again, mana is very important. Being able to accelerate rapidly is very important. Recently, I took out Lotus Petal. I kind of feel like Storm has been hit enough that it's consistent. Storm is still very good, don't get me wrong. But with Yawgmoth's Will going up a point, the deck has lost another ritual in the form of Mana Vault. I think the point spread, I don't know if this is ubiquitous, but I do think that the best Storm decks should play Black Lotus, Gifts Ungiven, and Yawgmoth's Will. In a minimum, I think it's Black Lotus, Yawgmoth's Will. Whatever you want to do with the last 2 points, you can do. You could probably do Vault plus Imperial Seal if that's what you desire. I don't think it's right because Imperial Seal is a good card. It's a fine card. But you really don't want tutors in that deck that put things on top of your deck. You want it to put it in your hand because it's not as good with Yawgmoth's Will. It's kind of the problem. And Gifts Ungiven does that. So I think that's why you want to run it. It's also 4 cards, so you probably should be playing Gifts Ungiven. It's kind of my point. But the deck has gotten a little slower, right? A little bit less consistent. It just has less... I mean, it's lost points, right? And one of the strategies I kind of take going into playing this format and building in this format... and not always. I mean, this format's about fun, too. So, like, sometimes I'll put some fun old cards in decks just for meme quality, I think is what the young people call it. But for me, it's fun. Is you want to equity build in your points. This is a deck that doesn't really need to equity build as much in its points because it's just running fast mana. It's running Black Lotus and Mox Ruby. It's just high roll, folks. Like, that's all it's doing. But there's a lot of other decks that are more synergy focused, like Storm, for instance, or like, Kiki Cheeky combo, Kiki Pod, Crater Hoof, that like really want to build equity in their points. Tolarian Academy style decks. You name it. I would say this is one of the few decks that like has very low reliance on its points. That's kind of what I was saying at the beginning. Like, if you want a good cheap deck, like, I know this is not the version of the cheap deck that you're going to run, but, like, you don't need Black Lotus or Mox Ruby. The deck will be great, like, regardless. You can even build medium red where you don't need, like, you wouldn't play Black Lotus even if you could, and you could play Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, and Ancient Tomb and City of Traders and Crystal Quarry, etc. That deck's very good, too. Just a little bit different matchups. But anyways, that deck's got a little slower, so like I kind of shied away from the Lotus Petal. Black Lotus is very powerful, don't get me wrong, but it does represent card disadvantage over time. The reason I was running Lotus Petal for a long while in this deck, and actually it probably could have just been a Simeon Spirit Guide. Probably should have been, to be honest, because it doesn't get Duressed out of my hand, it doesn't get shattered, but I wouldn't play it out if I wasn't going to use it. But the reason I was doing that is because the format was... The best decks in the format were so quick over time. Like, they were so quick to kill by turn 3 to turn 4 that, like, when I lost die rolls, I knew I was losing the game. Like, I knew if my opponent was good at what they were doing and they mulliganed to an appropriate hand, that they were going to beat me faster than I could beat them if they were on the play and I was on the draw with this deck. So I started playing those cards because, like, I just needed that boost. I needed to basically retake back the draw. I was never so deep as playing, like, Gemstone Quarry, I think it is, or it's Gemstone Quarry, I think, or Gemstone Mines. The one that comes into play on your opponent's turn and enter the battlefield, or has an opening hand action if you're on the draw. Never quite that deep, but, like, it was a real problem, like, I thought, for the deck. And maybe I hadn't built it right, but, like, I had a very aggressive build like this, where, like, it could possibly be a little more aggressive, like, more one-mana spells, but, like, not much more. This is a very aggressive build of it. There's not a ton of value built into it. It's really just about getting the job done. But, like, I was still losing to, like, good Tendrils decks, turn 3 and turn 4, before I could seal a game up when I was on the draw. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think you can kind of shy away from that, so I have cut the Lotus Petal from my build of the deck. In some of the games, you probably see me playing Lotus Petal, but I was just like, I don't need this. Like, I actually wanted to go up land and cut a Lotus Petal to kind of up the consistency of the deck, and just give it a little bit of a better median draw as opposed to more high roll draws. Which could be wrong, but like I think in general this is one of those decks that like is going to operate better under consistency. So anyways, let's go over the rest of the piles, guys. I mean, yep, fast mana. Fast mana wins games in this format. It's an eternal format, and if you high roll Lotus, you'll tend to win a lot of games with it. All right, this first pile here is kind of like I put it in its own spot. It's kind of burn in a way. Most of it's intended to be burn. Brute Force. This is just really like intended to be like an extra lightning bolt in the deck. And actually, there's another card I should probably put in here. It's Fervor. I think I own one in here. Maybe I don't. It's Unstable Mutation is what it is, but that card could possibly be in here as well. If you're not familiar, there's a red card. It's one red. Put on a creature. The creature gets +3/+3, and on each upkeep it gets a -1/-1 counter on it, so it eventually dies. That card's quite good. Even if it only hits once, it's fine because it's a lightning bolt, and they're spending energy cards and time to kill your creature that has it on there the turn after. You don't want to play it into like open mana. But if you don't have to, if they're on a tap out turn, just slam out a creature, slam in there, remove their creature or get in for lightning bolt damage. If they're spending a card on it at that point, like honestly, like yeah, it's a 2-for-1 on board, but like it's not really a 2-for-1 because again, we're playing by Philosophy of Fire and we got our damage in, so our cards did what they were intended to do. And the removal spell would have killed my creature anyways. That card should possibly be in here. I can never. Is it Consuming Fervor? Let's see. Because I'm now curious. I may not own the card on MTGO. Yeah, it is. I wouldn't fault anyone for playing this card. I think actually you probably should. The card's really good. It's certainly not card advantage. I know auras tend to be frowned upon, but this is a lot of damage for not a lot of input. Like, yes, your creature will eventually die, but the game's going to end before turn 4 to 5, right? So, I mean, who cares? Like, if your creature gets attacked 3 times with this on it, they're dead. Like, they're just going to be dead. So, yeah, I don't have this card in my collection, but I do think I would probably add this. I might go grab it up right now, but I think I would probably put that in the deck. Probably over Lava Dart. I think Lava Dart is a worthy cut. We're at 36 creatures. We have a couple token generators, which is another thing I want to talk about. This specific build. I think the card's definitely worth it in the build. All right, you have Reckless Charge and Collateral Damage. These are pretty similar cards, but they are distinct. Reckless Abandon, Reckless Charge, different card. That is a flashback card. This will cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. It does 4 damage to any target. So this is a 4 damage burn spell for 1 mana. At card loss, it's also a sorcery speed, but 4 damage is a ton. Like, that's just a ton of damage for 1 mana. A lot of your creatures become vestigial in this deck over time. You're going to have token creatures off of Rabble Masters, War Bosses, Young Pyromancers. And, they can really just kind of get brick-walled by some of your opposing threats. And by the time that happens, ideally, you've done enough damage, enough work, that, like, throwing this at face could just kill them. I've often also found, like, there have been occasions where I've used this card also to kill Okos, because that card has just such ridiculously high fucking loyalty. But, like, I've attacked a Loco for 2, and then, like, throw my Goblin Guide at it, and then cast 2 more idiot 1/1s out, or one drops out, 2 1s, probably. But yeah, Sorcery Speed is kind of one of the detriments to this card. It's the biggest distinction that it has between it and Collateral Damage. Collateral Damage is basically the same card, but does 1 less damage when it does 3 to any target. But it's an instant, which is kind of nice because you can cast this in response to removal. Like, someone casts a Lightning Bolt or an Arc Trail on your idiots, like, you just throw it at their face, and it's like, alright, I was going to lose that card anyways. Like, I didn't lose a card. I got another Lightning Bolt. Brute Force, just a lot of damage. Instant speed, which is kind of nice. You can blow people out in combat. I really do like having a couple pump spells in like decks like this because like it keeps people honest. Like you can attack. You have a lot of more bluff equity when you get them once with a Brute Force or a Mutagenic Growth because not a lot of folks expect it honestly in an Eternal format. Canadian Highlander, like oftentimes folks will not play around it. I think it's more so now they will because like RG Blitz is a good deck. When I say RG Blitz, I mean like this style of deck with higher creature quality and more pump spells like Collision Colossus, Giant Growths, Berserks, bigger creatures. Not much higher mana cost, but they have green, so they get like Tarmogoyfs and just big dumb creatures. Curd Apes, whatever. So yeah, pump spells. They're actually pretty good. And then these cards like they just represent a ton of damage for not a lot of mana input. Like I think they're great. I would run them in your red decks. You don't have to, but like they're a ton of damage, even though it is some card loss. All right, just the pure threats. Well, not pure threats. I do have some lands in this pile too that I kind of wanted to count. And like, you could take these lands and put them in the card advantage pile too. Like something that represents a threat and also produces mana is card advantage. It's kind of card. It's how you need to look at card advantage if you're playing red, because like you don't have a ton of draw cards. Like you do have some, like Bomac Couriers, just like literally draw cards, which that card's busted. Go figure. But yeah, like Mishra's Factory, also busted for its time and age, and Mutavault, quite good as well. Represent the ability to cast your spells, and then transition if you have more lands than you need into becoming threats, which is quite strong. Alright, Zergo, yep, this is just a 2-2 for 1. Can be dashed, which can be relevant in certain matchups, like maybe Oath, whatever. Decks that are going to play Wrath of Gods against you. Maybe you just need a shock on the turn you're casting this guy. Can be Caracas, which is of note, but it's just such a good rate for a 2-2 body. Great. And it can't block things with 2 or greater power. Who cares? You're not blocking in this deck. Sometimes you do, but not oftentimes. Rakdos Cackler, just a 2-2. You can leash this thing, which I have in some matchups, but oftentimes you're unleashing it to make it a 2-2. Sometimes you need to block. Tattermunge Maniac, this card can probably go, but I honestly I'll be honest with you guys, I'll level with you. Like, this card is good enough, I think, in like 4 to 5 color, like 4 color, like all 1-drops, just because it's very easy to cast. Having that green-red hybrid mana is quite nice because it allows you to cast this thing with a lot of different types of lands, like Savannah cast this thing. In Red Deck Wins, you probably don't need to run this card anymore, but I'm running it because I think the card's hilarious, and yeah, it's just fun to play with. Like, it's just a hilarious card to me. Also notably a Goblin, so it does kind of buff these two idiots up right here. Or I guess it buffs this idiot up right here. So yeah, I'm still playing it because it's like it's one of those cards where like it's just, I don't know, it has some legacy I think in the format. And then honestly, like, I'm not a longtime Canadian Highlander player, but I'm a longtime Hunter card player, and it has some like pedigree and some legacy and like Hunter card, just straight up Hunter card as well. But I think its day is probably gone, but it's still just a 2-1 for 1. So like, it's not so wrong that like you couldn't play it and be fine, and like I think it's fine in this build too. Figure of Destiny, yeah. So a little bit more of an investment card. Like, you could actually honestly almost kind of look at this card as like a card advantage card as well, because it just scales over time. Which, having a free mana sink, like, it is kind of a free mana sink. Like, yes, you're already putting 2 into it to make it 2-2. But if the game goes, it's not really like initially that threatening. Like, if your opponent's really worried about their life points early, they're probably removing your other 2-1s like Jackal Pups and Goblin Guides. And one of the things I find is, like, oftentimes Figure just kind of gets forgotten, or it doesn't get dealt with early because they can't, because they're going to be dead if they do interact with Figure over something else. And then Figure just becomes a 4-4 and just kills them. I've even had it become an 8-8 flying first striker, Spirit Warrior Avatar in some games, which is rare, but it does come up. Normally on Lotus Draws. Ice-Eyed Golem, yeah, if you're playing an aggressive deck, an aggressive monochromatic deck specifically, play this card. It's just good. It's just 2-2 for 1. And also you have to have access to Snowlands. I don't know how accessible they are on paper now. I know they were reprinted. Pardon me. But this card's just good. It's just a 2-2 for 1, which is a fair rate. Well, I don't know if it's a fair rate, but it's a good rate. Stormkirk Noble, yeah. So this card's actually kind of interesting. Like, I don't know if this card would have like stood the test of time if it didn't have this one line of text. I think this one line of text is actually really relevant. Humans can't block this card, which is actually really nice against like the white decks. There's a lot of humans in the white decks, like Thalias, you name it. The Knights, a lot of the Knights are humans. This card gets like through a lot, and like over time it does really add up. Yes, it's a 1-mana 1/1. It's kind of an investment card, and you'll kind of see like most of this build's kind of gone away from investment. I'm not running like Shrine of Burning Rage, which is a really good card, and like in Cube can be really strong, but it's just too slow in the format in my opinion. This card's kind of slow too, but like so I'm still looking to kill by turn 3 to turn 4. Like turn 4 is the most realistic kill turn for this. Turn 3's happened, but turn 4 is most realistic. It's very reliable. And over a 4-turn game, this card becoming basically a 3/3 by the time they're dying is a good 1-drop. It's 1, 2, 3. Like, and if that's representing 6 damage on one card, like, I'm pretty happy with it. And because it's not really that initially threatening, sometimes it gets passed over, again, kind of like the Figure of Destiny does. Soulscar Mage, this card's just great. If you ever play with this card, like, try it out in your red decks. This card gets played in a lot of other decks, too. Like, gets played in, like, Blue-Red Blitz. I played it in Blue-Red Tempo. The reason this card's great is, one, it has Prowess, which is a pretty good mechanic. It's a 1/2 for 1 red. And the rules text on it: if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, that many -1/-1 counters put on that creature instead. So it basically gives all of your non-creature damage Wither, which is quite good. This works well also with like Grim Lavamancer because it's non-combat damage, etc. This will help you if you get into like a longer grindier game where like maybe they dealt with your board early with a Toxic Deluge or something. Generally, that's one of the cards that like this deck can have troubles with its initial flood of creatures. Like by turn 4, like turn 4 Wrath is generally too slow to kill this deck or to be decisive against this deck. Turn 3 can be good enough, especially on the play. But like if you get this card down and like you haven't been able to really lock up a good board position, like and you have to like chip down like a Siege Rhino or a Tarmogoyf, this card really helps with that because like it allows your spells to kind of build up some damage over time, and it also has prowess so it can like have some upsets in combat, or it makes combat a lot more difficult. Rigging Runner, this card is just kind of a 2/2. Like this deck has so many low drop creatures and low drop damage spells that like I kind of felt like I just wanted to run Rigging Runner. It's just another 2/2. Like you do need to have attacked with something, but if this deck's not attacking, like you're kind of doing it wrong. I hate to say, so I thought like the downside, like the setup on this card is low enough for what this deck wants to be doing that it's worth playing. And it's also a 2/2 First Striker, which is pretty good. Like, First Strike's honestly not irrelevant, especially when you're complementing it with, like, cards like Burst Lightning. I automatically point to, like, Chain Lightning, which is a sorcery. Like, Burst Lightning, Seal of Fire, I guess, is on board. Lava Dart, which is currently in, but probably should be out. Lightning Bolt, Shard Volley, Wild Slash. You got to get the picture here. All of these, like Searing Spear, plus Incinerate, plus Lightning Strike. I think you guys get the point. Like, Bone Crusher Giant. There's a lot of instant speed burn in the deck, which complements well with First Strike. Also complements well with the prowess, like I was kind of talking about before. Alright, yep. So Monastery Swift here. Just most folks who've played Burn historically or before in their life probably know about this card. I'm going to take Consuming Firmer out of the sideboard, but like that's a card that I'll probably pick up after this and find a place for in the deck. Maybe it'll just be Tatterpunch Maniac comes out because the card's really not that great. Shacklepup's also still in here. I think Shacklepup's still fine to be in this deck. It's been reprinted in Fire Drink Satyr and just upgraded. But again, it's still just a 2/1 for 1. It does have a downside on it, so like any red damage done to it does damage to you. But honestly, it's just a trade-off that's worth having. You're not really that worried about your life total in most matchups. Like the decks that can go as fast as this deck can go, don't attack your they kill you via like life loss, Tendrils of Agony, or something along those lines, like Time Vaults you out, whatever. But in general, like I don't equate any of that to like attacking your life total directly. They're not doing incremental damage to you. They're not like there's no creature combat. It's just like they do a thing and they win. This deck, on the other hand, like has to do a bunch of damage. And against those decks, Shacklepup's just fine. Like you kind of need to have that like low end grunt, like like 1 drop, 2, like 1 drop, 1 drop, 1 drop, 2 drop, 1 drop. You're dead. Like you kind of want to have that. So I think Shacklepup's still fine. Goblin Guide, yep, this card's pretty ubiquitous with red in most formats. A lot of damage, hasty, very cheap. Can give him some lands, which is card disadvantage. Also can give you some information, not bad. G2 Lava Runner, a lot of spells in this deck. This is all the burn over here, and like reach is kind of what I called it. So yeah, like G2 Lava Runner is generally going to be a 2/2 haster if you set it up. Fire Drink Satyr, it's the upgraded version of Shacklepup, pretty good card. Fanatical Firebrand, I kind of just like this card. Like it's grown on me. I definitely love Mog Fanatic. I'm not running it in the deck right now. You possibly can get away with running a Mog Fanatic. It's not a bad card. But Fanatical Firebrand's basically a Mog Fanatic that has haste now. Well, I guess technically no, it's not the same as Mog Fanatic. It has haste, but it also Mog Fanatic can be tapped. You can still activate it. You just have to sacrifice its activated ability. This is an activated ability as well, but it requires tap of the card. So they're a little different, but this card having haste is kind of nice. One of the things you'll find, like there's a couple cards that like require damage to have been dealt or attacks to have happened. Like when you start looking at like Light Up the Stage, it has Spectacle on it. I'm gonna have trouble finding them now, but where's it at? Not Riftbolt. Skewer the Critics. Where are you at, big boy? All right, Stormblood Berserker, like with Bloodlust or Bloodthirst, like. These effects like require damage to have been done, like some sort of damage to have been done. There's also Raid, which it can be set up as well by this thing. But there's a lot of cards in the deck that just require damage to them and done. Like having that ability just to reach and like hit them is kind of nice. And then like oftentimes like you'll hit them once or twice with it, and then like they'll play like a Birds of Paradise sound or like a Land of Were Elves. Like you just want to get rid of it to slow them down, kind of use it as a wasteland. So I really like the card. That's actually one of the reasons playing Lava Dart too. Like I'm playing online, and there's a lot more Mana Dork decks online, and Lava Dart was kind of pulling its weight. Even though I do think in a more open meta, I'd probably run Consuming Fervor. I mean, maybe the online meta is the most open meta because there's just a ton of players. Like I don't know, but it tends to be very mid-range centric, more mid-range centric. So yeah, that's kind of why I was running Lava Dart. But one damage can be very relevant, especially if you're playing against a bunch of Dork decks, a bunch of Mana Dork decks, etc. Falconwrath Gorger, just a 2-1. The Madness text does not matter on it. Hellspark Elemental. You can also put this card over here in card advantage. Represents 6 damage for 4 mana over the course of 2 turns. Can be quite good. There's another card, Hell's Thunderer. Pull that card up for you guys. It's an old card that used to get played in builds of red decks or red deck wins. It's too expensive. Like it used to see play. It's quite good. It does not have trample. It has flying, so it has evasion. It's a 4/4 for 3 that nails them, and then it has unearth as well. Unearth is 5 though. It's red 4. This card has kind of stayed on because it's so efficient. That card I've kind of gotten away from. I think most pilots have gotten away from because it's just too slow. But yeah, it's still a pretty cool card. Kari Zev. So, this card's kind of grown on me. Like, initially when it was printed, like, I wasn't that high on it for Canadian Highlander. Or not for Canadian, I'm sorry, I wasn't playing Canadian Highlander, for 100 card Singleton. And a lot of that may have been because more so than when I was playing 100 card formats, it was more attritional and more mid-rangey than Canadian Highlander is. And the removal suites were a little more robust because there was a lot more of those grindy matchups going on. Like you'd have people playing like Mortifies and shit like that. And I wanted to push more damage faster. And there are better cards than Kari Zev for like pushing damage faster. But Kari Zev's actually really resilient. She's hard to block because she has Menace, obviously. She also has First Strike, which means that like she's still kind of tough to block because if you block her with like X1s, like she can knock out the X1 that would be the one that does enough damage to kill her, and then just take 1 or 2 from the other X1. She also has 3 toughness, which is kind of an interestingly like become more of a benchmark for me in deck building, especially when I'm building aggressive decks. Like, yeah, I mean, if you can get to 4 toughness, like that's great. You can pass the bolt test, which is like the kind of, I want to say antiquated, but like the legacy term that people like apply to like assessing creatures, and their playability is like, hey, does it pass the bolt test? And like, yes, this card does not pass the bolt test, but like honestly, there's not a lot of decks that like play. There's a lot of decks that play Lightning Bolt, but like when you're playing 100 card Singleton, there's not unless you're on like a very committed red deck that's as deep as this one is. There's not really a ton of like 1 mana just like 3 damage burn spells. Like there's a lot, but like some of them are very committed cards. Like when you get to cards like Shard Valley, like you know what you're doing. Like you're trying to win the game with direct damage, right? Like you don't really want to be casting Shard Valley or Fire Blast to kill creatures. Sometimes you do, and sometimes it works out, but you don't often want to be. There's a lot more cards like Bone Crusher Giant, which is a shock for 2 mana, or cards like Forked Bolt, or possibly Firebolt, Burst Lightning, Arc Trail, Fire Ice, Electrolyze. I'm just naming off some examples of cards that do see play in the format that don't really deal with her as effectively, and because decks have to be more prepared for a wider range of decks in the metagame, they're unable to really saturate with the level of removal that you see in possibly other varieties of 100 card Singleton. And I don't want to speak for like Eurolander, because I haven't played it in a while, but like just, I'm talking like the dead MTGO format. Like Kari Zev would be a no-go in that format, but like in this format, she's quite great. Like she's grown on me. Very, very good. Kill the Marauders. This card's getting a little old. It maybe could use some replacing in the deck, but it's still pretty good. I mean, like 2 mana for a 3/3 that basically, like what you're looking for out of this card is to get 5 damage at a 2 mana mana card. And or like just kill a Mana Dork. Like kill a Mana Dork basically for free and get 2 damage out of it, which is still pretty good because then it's a Wasteland at that point that did 2 damage. Basically a Shock and Wasteland attached to the same card. That's kind of what you're looking for this card to do, and it's fine. Like, it does its job okay. If you can give it haste in some way, like, it becomes actually quite good, because then it represents 8 damage, which is a ton for a 2-mana card. Alright, Stormblood Berserker. This card is great. Like, M12 special here. Haven't seen its like again. But yeah, I mean, a 3/3 Menace is just really good. Like, I'm shocked this card still sees play. It's getting quite old, but it's still very, very good. When I say old for this one, it's old in time. It's still very good, though. I don't think it's close to the chopping block yet. Viashino Pyromancer, relatively new addition to this deck, but card's very good. 2 mana for a 2/1, not a great rate, but it has pseudo haste in the form of just doing 2 damage directly to a player, or Planeswalker, which is not irrelevant because it can help finish off an early Planeswalker. And as you know, Planeswalkers have been getting better and better over time, and getting higher and higher loyalty, such that like there are some 3 mana Planeswalkers that can have upwards of 6 loyalty by turn, played on curve or maybe off of Moxen by turn 2 to 3. So, I mean, even though we're a deck that's presenting, ideally like 3 threats on turn 1, but like generally like 2 to 3 threats by turn 2, we're not going to be able to finish off 6 loyalty very easily. This card, if you play it off curve, can finish off like an Oko, for instance, or something else. All right, card advantage. So I already talked Fiery Confluence a bit. I'm not going to talk that one again. Light up the stage. This card, quite good. So again, like if you acquire Spectacle, which means your opponent has had life loss this turn that you're on, you get to put 2 cards in exile, and then you can play them until your next end of turn, which is very good. Like this is basically 1 mana card draw, and red deck wins. Great, just great card. Been very happy with it. I was a little resistant at first, but I think the card is just really good. Smuggler's Copter. You should play this card in every aggressive deck that you play. I can't think of an aggressive deck where you would not want to play this. Like, I don't know. Unless, like, you were, like, Spirit of the Labyrinth Tribal, maybe. Like, I don't know what deck would not want to run this that was aggressive. This card is very aggressive. It's 2 mana, 3/3. You play a non-haste route, or play, like, a 1-drop down off curve on turn 3, plus a 2-drop, maybe, and fire this thing up. It's an evasive 3/3. Like, evasive Hill Giant for 2 mana that draws me a card and allows me to get rid of trash. Great. This card's new, for me at least. I haven't played a lot with this card yet, but I'm giving it a try. It's experimental in this build, but I think it's probably good enough. The card's got a lot of words on it. So it's a 2 mana, 2/2 haster with reach. I don't know how often the reach will come up, but I'm sure I'd be surprised. But anyways, you exile the top card of your opponent's deck, or library. And then during any turn you attack with the rogue, you can cast that card, and you may spend mana as though we're at mana of any color to cast that card. Honestly, like, this card is just, it's close enough. It's a little bit overrate. Like, the disruptive effect's not really there. It's really kind of more of a card advantage card. I would really consider this disruption unless, like, your opponent, like, flips a top to the top and then you cast this thing and get their top. Like, that'd be kind of cool. Steal their Sensei's Divining top, or whatever. But more so it's just a way to gain some card advantage. And it's close enough to the primary plan at doing 2 damage a turn that, like, I think it's definitely worth trying. The more I played the deck, the kind of more I found that, like, an effect like this is probably desirable in the deck. Abbot of Carol Keep, yep, running this guy. He's okay. I mean, the card's not great. If it didn't exile the top card of your deck and give you basically a free hopeful land drop, because normally you're playing this card on turn 3. It's really not a 2-drop, it's a 3-drop. Unless you're trying to high roll Lotus or a Chrome Mox or something like that, or a Mox Ruby. Or maybe, like, I don't know, Mutagenic Growth. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could high roll some stuff off the top of your deck. I guess Fire Blast would do it too. There's a few in the deck you could high roll with this. I mean, I guess you have to high roll, But this card's normally going to be a 3-drop, and normally what you're looking for is just a land with it. If you don't find a land, you're looking to find a 1-drop at that point, because you'll generally have access to 1 more mana on that turn if you have a land in hand. So oftentimes you see this card be played on in turn 3. It's kind of like how Courser of Crufix is kind of a 4-drop, and Tireless Tracker is kind of a 4-drop. You'll still generally tend to see those played on 3 because they'll be played in Mana Dork decks, but they're generally played on those turns so that they can gain some value on the turn they're used. Bomat Courier, card's just absurd. Just really good. Like, just so good. So if you're not familiar with Bomat Courier, this was kind of one of the cards that took, I think it was Ramanap Red to the top in its standard rotation. This is one of those cards that, like, I don't know why they printed this. It's just very good. Like, anytime you give decks like this, like just very high-tempo decks, card draw, you're kind of playing with fire, so to speak, and pun very much intended. Bomat Courier, you get it down in turn 1, you attack a couple times with it, you play the rest of your hand out, you get it up to 3 or 4 cards underneath it, you at some point are going to run out of cards, you attack, when they block this thing, you pop it, draw 3 to 4 cards, it's going to have to get dealt with, at some point, whether it needs to get blocked in combat or it needs to get removed directly, it's a one power attacker that punches up a ton more than you'd expect. I mean, I guess it just punches up a ton more. Like, it just does. Like, you probably expect it. Card's good. All right, Fiery Islet, Barbie Ring, and Smoke or Sunbaked Canyon here. These are just card draw. They're land drops and card draw over time. So if you flood a little bit, you just pop one of these things, find your burn you need to finish the game, win the game. Barbie Ring, again, like we are playing fetch lands. We're playing these lands right here. We're playing a bunch of cards that kind of are, not like independently that strong, but together like represent a very solid, focused plan, but is going to expend a lot of cards. Barbie Ring's pretty easy to set up, unless you have an active Pyromancer or your opponent's like scoozing your yard or something like that. Scavenging, oozing your yard, or Deathrite Shamaning it. But Barbie Ring's not that hard to set up, and like it's basically just it's doing some damage to you. But like again, this deck doesn't really care about that. It's not it does a little bit, but not much. I mean, the matchups where that's going to matter, like you're probably already a dog in the matchup anyways, which that's going to be like White Weenie. Death and Tax is not great, but it's winnable. But yeah, Barbie Ring just kind of slices dices. I mean, it's a land that represents a shock later on in the game, which is nice. All right, your next pile here, you have Burn. So Fire Blast, this card is just absurd. 4 damage for 0 mana. I mean, you sacrifice 2 mountains, but who cares if you're winning the game? Pretty good. You don't often want to use this for creature removal if you haven't played a lot with Fire Blast. You can. I have, and sometimes it's right, but it rarely is right. Like, it's very rarely right. It's kind of like attacking with Mother of Runes. It's rarely right. Sometimes it is, though. Exclusive Firecraft, it's 3 damage. I've kind of gotten away in a lot of my builds from like the 3 mana, 4 damage burn spells, but this one's just so good. Like, it is sorcery speed, but like being uncounterable is really great. I mean, it can still be misdirected or like diverted or something like that, like crazy stuff. But it can't be countered, and oftentimes, like, if you're like play against a blue deck, like if they stabilize, like you can be in a lot of trouble because it's gonna be hard to ever resolve another spell, and maybe they have a means of continued card advantage. On board, and maybe eventually they're going to find a way to threaten you, which means that like you either need to build up to like a 3 to 4 spell turn, where like you try to cast a seal plus a lava dart plus a lava spike plus a lightning bolt, try to overwhelm their mana, like generally using the EOT plus your main phase to to overwhelm their ability to counter all your spells, or you can have exclusive Firecraft where you're just like, hey, you're fucking dead, like, against that style of deck, which I think is kind of just nice to have. And it also just deals with a lot of big dumbs. Like, it deals with, like, Courser Crucifix, just deals with that kind of card as well. It's any target, so that's kind of nice. Alright, Rift Bolt, this is really a 1-mana spell, but yeah, it's just very good. Played modern, good card. Bone Crusher, just really good. This is really just card advantage too. I mean, this is basically 2 cards stable to 1. They're a little bit overcosted for their effect. I mean, I have a hard time saying that 3 mana for a 4/3 that has basically a non-target clause on it is overcosted. It's not. But the stomp part of it is overcosted. Shock is a little overcosted, but it's not quite shock, right? Like, Stomp does also stop damage prevention, so like that stops stuff like Maze of It. It stops protection as well. So like Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes, True Name Nemesis, cards like that, like Hex Drinker. Pardon me, guys. Cards like that actually don't have damage prevention to them. So if like they block with their True Name Nemesis on your Ash Zealot, you can cast Stomp at their face or on another creature they have, and like suddenly, their True Name Nemesis is just dead to first strike damage. So this card actually, that is relevant on the Stomp part of it, but like realistically, you're just looking for the 2 damage off it in most cases. But there is some upside to having a card or access to Stomp as well because it's damage prevention. Skewer, 1 mana, 3 damage, any target. Of note, like Spectacle on this style of card, like I vacillate on this card. Because it has a timing restriction, right? 1, it's a sorcery, and 2, it has the Spectacle cost needs to happen main 2, right? Because it's a sorcery, so it has to happen main 2. So like when you can cast this is pretty localized in game. You can also cast it for retail, like in late game, if you just need to cast it for retail. But you're obviously playing this to get the 3 damage early off of it. But it serves as worse removal in the deck generally. Volcanic Hammer, get a little bit old, but I just love the art of this card. Like, I love that old hammer. And, the card's still fine. Like, the card's still just quite good. It's 3 damage for 2 mana. Direct damage, so fine. Searing Spear, great. Wouldn't replace it. Not yet, at least. Price of Progress, yep. This is one of the few Punisher-style cards that this deck's playing. I don't know if they call it Punisher-style. And actually, this should this could possibly just go over to disruption. It's just that much damage. So there are lands decks in this format. If you weren't aware, they recently got some pointing changes on Strip Mine. There's a lot of decks that play a lot of fetch lands, a lot of dual lands, a lot of utility lands, you name it. But most decks, Price of Progress, represents 6 to 8 damage. Some decks it represents 10 to 12. Some decks it represents 0. Some decks is just really bad. Some decks you want to just see this card with Chrome Box in your opening hand so you can exile it and just get rid of it. If you're playing in the mirror match. But, honestly, even in the mirror match, it can represent 2 to 4 damage, which is not bad. As you see, I have Mutavault, Mishra's Factory, I have this Barbarian Ring, this Castle Embereth, Sunbaked Canyon, Fiery Islet, Wasteland, if you can't target something. But, even in, the monocolored decks, it's funny, I think there's a saying that, Ben Wheeler has, 2-color deck that dies to Blood Moon, or 1-color deck that dies to Blood Moon. Most decks have non-basics in their deck, unless they're a really price-pointed deck for budgetary reasons. If someone's playing a list that they feel is optimized, they're probably going to have some utility lands. So even in the mirror matches, you can still hit them for a little bit of damage. I'm not saying you'd play this card if all you plan on playing was red deck wins mirror matches, but you're playing this card for the ceiling that it has. Which the ceiling this has is a 1-card win con. The card's just absurdly powerful. You'll note I'm not playing Blood Moon in this deck or Magus of the Moon. I think those cards are very good. Maybe they're right in the metagame that you're in, but they also cost a lot of mana, and they don't have a ton of intrinsic value in and of themselves. They don't per se win the game, right? Price of Progress just wins the game. It just ends the game on the spot against the decks that those cards would hose. So, you could play them, and I think, from talking to some of the folks that play up in Victoria, some folks are playing Blood Moon type effects in their lower curve red deck wins now, which is an option you have. You can definitely do it. Anyways, moving on, you have Incinerate. Again, it's kind of Incinerate, Lightning Strike, Searing Spear. They're all the same card. All very good. Incinerate Flow. This is basically a newer Volcanic Hammer. It's a little better in the fact that it exiles the thing. So, against Kitchen Finks, this can be relevant. That's fine. It's the same with Pillar of Flame. If you target a Kitchen Finks, so this is quite good because it exiles that threat and ensures that it doesn't come back. Actually, also of note, and to extol some of the equity in these cards. Incendiary Flow and Pillar of Flame also randomly pretty good against Academy Rector or Arena Rector. Academy Rector is more common in the format, but Arena Rector sees some play as well. But exiling those cards is quite good because you don't want them to die, and they tend to be walls for this style of deck because you don't want to kill them if they die. If they actually literally die and they get the trigger resolved, you generally lose the game. Pillar of Flame, 4 damage for 2 mana, sorcery speed, but it's to both players. But again, it's just so much damage for 2 mana. You play this card. Arc Trail. This card could actually honestly go over the 2-for-1 pile here, as could Forked Bolt. Actually, as could Lava Dart. I kind of feel like Lava Dart falls in that same realm, but for different reasons. All right, so Arc Trail, just, against the decks that are going to be impacting the board, this card keeps the board clear. In the matchups where they're just not playing creatures, it kind of sucks, but you're still doing 2 damage to them with it. You can do 1 damage to yourself. You can put 1 damage on, your Goblin Guide or whatever. And it's overcosted shock at that point to just do it to their face. But in the matches where this is good, against Crater Hoof, against, White Weenie style decks, Death and Taxes, this card's really good. In the mirror matches, this card is very good. Of note, you could play cards like Searing Blaze and Searing Blood. Those cards are very good as well, and I think in a heavy creature meta, you definitely want to run those, especially if you plan on playing a lot of the mirror match or a lot of Mana Dork decks. I guess maybe not Mana Dork decks, but decks that are going to put down good attackers and blockers, basically white decks, good Death and Taxes lists, other good red decks. I really think those cards are great. Probably good to run in your deck. I'm not running them right now, but I think they are definitely a strong consideration. Let me pull those up for you so you can see what I'm talking about. Some of you longtime players have already seen it, but if you're a longtime player, you probably already jumped ahead to the gameplay. So, Searing Blaze here, that's a textless one. Let's pull up this one right here. Does 1 damage to target creature or player, or planeswalker, and 1 damage to target creature that player or planeswalker of that player or planeswalker's controls. Jeez, that's a fucking awkward sentence. Anyways, it does 1 damage. It's kind of shitty. It's double red spell, instant, but it has landfall. And if you have landfall, it does 3 damage to a player and or planeswalker, and 3 damage to a creature. So pretty good. pretty good card. Like, it's kind of card advantage, too, because, I mean, you're getting a burn spell out of a removal spell, which is very good. Searing Blood is a little less good, but requires less setup. Searing Blood, 2 damage to target creature. When that creature dies this turn, it deals 3 damage to that creature's controllers. This one can't actually target planeswalkers like Searing Blaze can, which is actually a new addition to that card. Probably why the writing, the way it was written, the sentence structure was all fucked up. Probably why, because it was probably redacted or errated, I think is what we call it. But yeah, these are both good cards. I think they're definitely better in more fair metagames. This deck is more tuned up to beat on what I kind of consider the top decks outside of, like, Death and Taxes. I kind of see that matchup. I just don't think this deck... I don't think it's bad. I guess that's the worst. Like, Death and Taxes does not equate to White Weenie, but it's still, like, fairly favored, I think, against red deck wins. I don't think it's a great matchup. So, I kind of just didn't worry about it. I was like, why worry about it? Like, I just don't want to draw a Searing Blood against a Time Vault deck or against a Storm deck. I just don't want to be there. Like, I don't want to be about that life. Or a lands deck even. Like, I'm just like, alright, like, maybe they're going to play less dorks in those style of decks, generally. Like, they're going to play some, but, like, I don't know. I'm not high on them right now. Some folks may be. In some metagames, you're going to be high on them. Like, and they're good cards. Like, so, like, if they're right for your metagame, like, try these cards out in your build. You can cut stuff like Flame Rift, like, just direct damage stuff. Because in those matchups, you're going to tend to be more board interactive and a little bit slower to kill. So the way the deck's built right now, it's tended just to kill people quickly. Like, it's very linear. And when you get to, like, kind of attacking the deck and, like, fleshing out your sideboard, not your sideboard slots, your flex slots is what I'm going to call it in the deck, because they're not sideboard cards. They can be thought of that way, but you don't have sideboards in Canadian Highlander, obviously. But when you start getting your how you're disrupting, like how you're interacting with the board, like you can look to run these cards. I think they'd be strong inclusions, and some folks probably do run them. Anyways, moving on. Like Lava Dart again, like kind of similar. Like I play against a few Mana Dork decks online, but I kind of wanted to have the deck tuned up to just like this card just does everything, right? Like it's a 1-mana shock. Yes, you're sacking lands, but, like, you don't care. Like, you just don't give a shit, right? Like, it's just a lot. And it's 2 prowess triggers, so we have prowess things. So, like, we have things where spells matter. A Young Pyromancer, 2 tokens, this just... The fact that you're casting 2 spells with this card is quite good. And yes, there is a non-bow in the deck. You have Ash Zealot. Who cares? Like, it's just more damage to your face. You don't really care. You care about the damage you're putting on their face. Is what you care about in this deck. And also the fact that like you can just kill 2 Mana Dorks is just really good in the early game, just to kind of forestall their development, basically wasteland them. Fork Bolt, same thing, just 2-for-1s against decks that matters, and can also go to face as a shock, which is fine. Sorcery speed shock, which is fine. All right, moving on. So you have like Chain Lightning, great card. Pretty much in every deck that runs red cards. Maybe not all. Flame Slash may see more play than Chain Lightning now. I don't know. It's close. But it's very, very good. Alright, Burst Lightning, also very good. I, for some reason, have a textless version here, but I can explain the card to you. It is a 1 red instant, and it has Kicker 4. If the spell is kicked, do 4 damage to any target. Otherwise, do 2 damage to any target. Very good. Firebolt, it's a shock that has flashback for a bazillion. You're rarely ever going to flash this back, but I have in this deck sometimes. Like, you just get stalled, and the 2 damage is all it takes from the graveyard. It's very good. Seal of Fire. Enchantment-based burn can be kind of nice, actually, because, like, it's kind of like a Seal of Cleansing, which is the disenchant variety of this card. Sometimes you don't know what you want to do with the burn yet, but you want to get it down so you have access to it. And sometimes, actually, you're choked on mana, but need to have more damage to deal with a certain thing, whether it be a planeswalker or a larger creature. Seal of Fire kind of helps out with that. At the end of the day, though, too, it's just a goddamn shock. It's just a shock. It's fine. Lava Spike, 3 damage to their face. Yeah, or Planeswalker. Damage is good. This does a lot of it for very little mana. Doesn't really have flexibility, but it's good. Lightning Bolt, best burn spell ever printed. If you're not familiar, this is also textless version, but 3 damage to any target. 1 mana instant speed. Pillar of Flame, already talked this card. Good at dealing with like recursive crap, Rector, Sphinx, etc. Shard Volley. Yeah, 3 damage to face. You're sacking a land, but who cares? You're killing them with it. Wild Slash. Not a ton of 4 power or greater threats in this deck. But yeah, this is just... it's just a good spell. Like sometimes you do end up with like prowess triggers allowing that to happen, and the ferocious capability on this card can be relevant because it stops damage prevention from occurring. So yeah, I mean it's just an upsided shock. I don't think I'm running shock in this deck. Vexing Devil. Yeah, this is just a 4 damage burn spell. Is how you need to look at it in the early game. In the long game, it can be kind of shisty because like if they allow this thing to sit around as a 4/3, you know it doesn't matter. You're really just looking at this to be a 4 damage burn spell, which oftentimes it is. Castle Embereth. I'm trying this card out. I've activated it once and it won me the game. You don't often want to have this as an only land in your opening hands, but if it's a second land, I think it's just fine. And the fact that it can have upside, on turn 4 when you're going for a win has come up once for me at least. And I think the overhead cost on it's pretty low. Yes, you can get wastelanded, but honestly, like red deck wins to me oftentimes feels like a deck that doesn't really mind getting wastelanded as much as long as you're playing smart. You don't want to expose this if you have other mountains in your hand or other lands that you want to play that turn. Because again, it does just expose you to wasteland. But like you generally expose this the turn you want to use it, or a turn before you want to use it, just because you need to progress your mana to cast your Rabblemaster or whatever. And then like if you have a Rabblemaster down or a 3-drop down or like 3 turns worth of spell development out, like if they're wastelanding, it doesn't matter all that much. It's kind of my thing. One other card I want to talk before I kind of jump into my disruption pile. We jump into some gameplay, and I gotta remember the name of the card. It's a Berserker, I want to say, and I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. All right, let me go to quantity 1. There it is, Scabland Berserker. I want to talk this card. I actually think this card's really good. I'm not playing it right now because, I was kind of saying I built this deck to like be as fast as possible and have like ounce against like the storm decks. I feel like this card, it is very good against that style of deck. I don't know if I feel it's like that necessary. And I'll be honest, I don't play against Storm all that often. I personally play Storm a significant bit actually online, but I don't play against it all that often. Not a lot of folks play combo online. I think in a meta where I was more concerned, if I really wanted to saturate for that matchup, I'd run this card. The card is very good. It's a very, very good card. It's a little bit slow though, at its rate, but against certain decks, it just obliterates them. Just makes it so they cannot win the game. It's basically Cam Ball. Against them. But 3 mana for a 2/2 that does 5 damage over the course of 2 turns from turn 3 to turn 4 is just... It's not a ton. I mean, the fact that it represents damage, outside of that is very good, and in the right matchups is great. But I'm not running it right now. Maybe I should be. I'm not, but this is a card also that I bring up because it's notably not in my deck, and I think it's a card you'll see in a significant number of other decks, or decks that you probably see that are on the Canadian Highlander deck database from Victoria competitions, because and it's possibly just my own misunderstanding of what their metagame looks like. Their metagame's probably more diverse than I probably give it credit for, but I think of degenerate shit, and this card is very good against degenerate shit. So if you're playing against a bunch of degenerate shit, play this card because it's very good. But anyway, jumping into my 3s. I already talked Omcrop. Did I talk all these cards already? I think I did talk all these hate cards over here. I did. So we're not going to talk them again. We'll jump over here to some of the other 3s, the beaters, the token generators as I call them, and kind of I put this in a separate pile because I kind of wanted to explain how I intended to build equity in these cards that are inherent card disadvantage in my deck. And it's through these cards right here. And actually, this guy could go over here. Young Pyromancer, Legion Warboss, and Goblin Rabblemaster. None of them are bad threats in and of themselves, and they all kind of synergize well with these cards right here, which are just great burn spells, but they are card disadvantage cards, at a trade-off for a lot of damage for very little mana. And then you have Goblin Bushwhacker, which is also kind of another thing that I've built equity in by having these goofy token generators, and I wouldn't call Rabblemaster or Legion Warboss goofy. Young Pyromancer is probably a little more questionable. You don't have to run it in red deck wins. It's a little bit slower, but it's a little bit more of a proactive. In my opinion, it's actually a more of a proactive version of Shrine of Burning Rage, because it kind of does something similar, right? Similar but different. It's more incremental than that card is, but it does kind of the same thing over time. So yeah, I'm running this card right now as kind of one of my other investment cards, Young Pyromancer, because it really doesn't do a ton in and of itself, but with the deck it does quite a bit of work. So anyways, guys, this is my current build of Red Deck wins. Like I said, if you cut out like the Black Lotus and the Mox Ruby, obviously Wasteland's still gonna be a bit of money, but like you put another mountain in, and you'd be fine without Wasteland as well. Although Wasteland's nice, you could build this deck for very cheap. And there are a ton of budget replacements for almost every card in the deck that you can make to make this deck with probably like $50 to $60, and do very well with it. Do very, very well with it. That's kind of why I want to cover it, because I haven't covered Red Deck Wins before on my YouTube. I do think it's one of the best decks in the format. I don't know if this is per se the best build of it, but I've done very well with this deck. And just gameplay with a wide variety of folks. And I think it's close enough. I think it's close enough to write that, if you were to take this list, you'd do fine with it. You could win events with this deck list. Could it use a little more fine-tuning? Yeah, sure. It could. And you could make some meta calls. But, I have a very hard time, with anyone saying a deck is right or correct. Because I think there's a lot of decision-making that needs to be done on how the metagame looks, how you want your specific variety of that deck to function. Do you want it to be more value-oriented? Because, I say value in Red Deck Wins, and, it sounds like they don't really go together. I mean it very loosely, and I use that term. Do I want my deck to be a turn 5 deck that's more resilient, or do I want it to be a turn 3 speed demon? That has no resilience, is very narrow, and just gets them dead. Because there's merits to both, right? And you can build differently to acquire consistency in your build to attain both those goals. That's kind of what I mean when I say building value. Turn 5 with, interaction and, range and matchups and, the ability to have more interaction via your spells, will tend to equate to slower wins because you're taking the time and the cards and the mana to do that. Whereas, your all one drops burn deck is going to win by turn 3 to turn 4, every time. If it doesn't get stopped. If they put a Tarmogoyf in the way, you're dead. That's kind of the trade-off, right? So this deck's somewhere in the middle. I think it has a decent, kind of mixed, a mixed batch to it. And I think there's a couple cards. I do think Scab Clan Berserker should be in here. I think that Fervored, whatever that thing is, the Fevered, whatever it is, the Unstable Mutation should be in here as well. I think I'd like to try those cards out. Scab Clan I played before. I just don't have it in here right now. But the Unstable Mutation, I guess I played that card too, but in blue. But I think it's a card that should be in here. That card's really good. But anyways, guys, I'm gonna go to a quick pause. I'm gonna go go freshen up a bit because, like I said, I am ill, and I'll be back momentarily, and we'll get some gameplay in, and yeah, you can see some Red Deck Wins stuff. Alright guys, we're back. I'm going to cover one last thing in the deck before we jump forward. So I've done a couple things here. I've actually removed Young Pyromancer. I ended up putting in Scab Clan Berserker. I was thinking about it more, and I'm like, this card's really just probably necessary. And honestly, I can't say Young Pyromancer. The games don't go long enough to get a ton of value off of it. Oftentimes I find I'm making, 2 to 3 elementals the turn I'm winning the game anyways, and, making elementals the turn you're winning doesn't really matter. The thing I did is I cut Mutagenic Growth, which I'm a little loath to do because I think Mutagenic Growth's great, but I think Fervor's better. You can also run Infuriate in this deck. There's a couple other good pump spells, there's the Titan Strength one. I do think Consuming Fervor is really good, though. This card's, for this style of deck, is very good. I mean, it's hard to say that any aura is really good, but, gosh, when they tap down and you get to put this thing on a 2-1 and just smash their face in with it, force their action on the next turn with their 2-mana interaction, just really good. I think it's probably better than Mutagenic Growth. Maybe not. Mutagenic Growth is quite good, but I'm cutting it for now. That's the card that came out, and then Young Pyromancer as well came out. That's my final build as of right now, but, Red Deck Wins does shift a bit. That's kind of where I stand right now, and there'll be a deck list posted as well, so if you want to see this deck, you can check it out. You could definitely go with more shocks in the build. You can go with more lands. I think Ben Wheeler recently won with a variety of Red Deck Wins. Although, of note, Ben, you're missing Bomat Courier from your deck. He had 30 lands in his and then more shock variants, a little more efficient than this build. This build's a little bit... I mean, calling it more top end is pretty aggressive. It's just, its cards independently are looking to do a little more damage, but they're going to be a little slower. Maybe by a quarter turn or a half turn. You start talking in quarter and half turns. I think you have to almost when you're talking about the difference in like speed or like reliability of turn kill. When you're talking about these cards, I personally think it's worth it, but I don't know. I don't play a ton of red deck wins. I play some of it. Maybe 4 to 5 times a week. I'll jam this deck. Sometimes I have opportunities to play against folks that want to jam against. I'll jam it like 10 to 15 times in a row. But and it often leads to they're fast games, so you can play a lot of them, you can grind a lot of games out. But I do fish quite a bit. This is one of my favorite decks to fish. I think it's actually a very fun deck to play too. Like I enjoy playing this deck. Not everyone appreciates this deck as much, so I don't jam it all of the time. But one of the things I also want to do before we jump forward is just kind of show you the mana curve of this deck, 'cause it's very low. I think this is accurate. Bone Crusher, you can go down here. Yeah. So this is the mana curve of the deck. It's pretty low. Pretty darn low. Alright guys, one more quick pause. We'll be back for gameplay here relatively soon. Alrighty folks, we're back. We're playing its hoof here. This is a fine opening hand. It's not the fastest. This is a game 1 though. I do know what my opponent's playing when we're playing this game. I think we played a match set of 3 or 4 matches. So I know what they're on. I've been changing up decks. So I ended up keeping this. I don't think I would have kept this in hoof if I knew it was hoof. But for playtesting, this is a hand I would keep in the dark. This variety of the deck, this is an older version of the deck. It has Hellrider in it. I actually ended up cutting Hellrider. It's kind of a funny argument. The 4-drops are the 4-drops you would tend to think of in red deck wins, like Hellrider, the God. I can never remember that silly thing's name. It's the 5/4 that allows you to pitch cards. That card, and then Koth of the Hammer, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. All really good cards. Why am I playing Fiery Confluence over those cards? 1, increased range. I kind of like the flexibility of it. And 2, it's actually better at killing folks on the turn that you can cast it than any of those cards are. Hellrider, if you have 2 to 3 creatures, represents 3 to 4 damage, 3 to 5 damage. The God represents 5 damage if it can hit them, but it's probably going to get chump blocked. Koth represents 4 if it can hit them again. Chandra, 2. Whereas Fiery Confluence, 6. Take 6. And they can counter it, yes. I mean, they can counter any of those spells. But it's the best at actually just killing people on the turn you want to do it. Now, is it the best over time? No, it's a one-time thing. But the turn you cast it just kills them. So what we have going on here is, I'm planning on playing a slower game here. I'm trying to actually set up this Stormblood Berserker right now. Opponent does have an Ancient Tomb. We were able to knock out their early mana development in the form of Birds of Paradise, which I think you want to do against this deck. I think it's actually worth the spending the card and the 3 damage. So I don't have a particularly fast hand. The fact that they have to use Ancient Tomb to kind of progress their board state, is helping me out because I'm not really doing that much outside of developing the Sulfuric Vortex. But I kind of want to fade them playing out a Kitchen Finks or playing out a Huntmaster of the Fells, which I know from where I'm at in this playing this game, they're on a red-green variety. I think they call it Blood Hoof, which is more of a mid-rangey version of Hoof. So they have Huntmaster, probably have Thragtusk in their deck or could have Thragtusk. Want to stop all of that. Plus, it honestly just makes the most sense for the turn cycle I'm on. I could try to fire up a Mishra's Factory, but that's pretty lame duck. May even get blocked. I can't cast out the Stormblood Berserker and have it be a 3/3 on that turn. So developing the Sulfuric Vortex over the course of 2 more turns can represent 4 damage, which makes the most sense. They're playing on a bunch of mana dorks, trying to set up to probably cast a 6 or 7 drop. I kind of want to limit their time here, so I attack, kind of hoping they're block actually. They don't, which is fine because it also sets up my Stormblood Berserker. So I've got about a 10 here, which means that they're going to have to do something pretty spectacular this turn, kill me, to not die. They cast out a Garruk, Caller of Beast, which is a very good card, but now I have lethal. So they're at 10. I play out this Lightning Berserker again, a card that's no longer my build. Attack in, get him to 0 exactly, off of their full tap-out turn. So this is a slightly bigger version of Red Deck Wins right here. As you can see, I have some cards that I've kind of cut, playing some of the games that I played in recently. Try to trim the deck down a little bit, make it a little more lean, a little more quick at doing its job. But still, this is a turn 4 kill. not through a lot of disruption, because Hoof would never really be called an interactive deck. It's really interactive in similar ways to like Red Deck Wins, like it's just trying to kill you. It has some, like these green red versions have a little more interaction. Now some of them even play Blood Moon. Our opponent also gave us a pretty strong assist with a slower opener. We were still able to get there by turn 4. And some of that was due to them taking 4 damage off Ancient Tomb. Definitely not untrue. So anyways, we're going to cut right here, go to game number 2 against Hoof, and we'll be back momentarily, guys. Alright, guys, we're back. Hand's great. I mean, Jackal Pup's not really outstanding in this matchup, but it's a 1-drop. Like, they're not likely to block it with their land. If they do, I'm getting a Stone Rain out of it and taking 1 damage. I think that's a fair trade. If I don't, then I'm getting damage in. They play a Rofellos out. They're not going to block with that. I probably should have just waited till post-combat just in case they did block with it. But they're not going to. If they do, it's just a misplay. I'd rather not win that way. They play out a Land War Tribe. Like, I have a lot of lands in hand. There's a strong consideration here to just going for a Fire Blast. I make it so that the Dryad Arbor can't block. I actually just blow this thing up. They've taken a lot of damage off their Ancient Tomb. That thing represents a lot of mana on the next turn, enough to like cast a Primeval Titan. And I kind of just want to get it off the board. They're down to 10 again, and they're tapping Ancient Tomb, take more damage. They play on a Titania, Protector of Argoth. I think I make some misplays in this game. I mean, they get their land back, and they get a 5-4 or 5-3. So I'm in trouble. Like, they have a ton of blockers now. I don't like this line. I think what I should have done is actually just killed the Mana Dork and done 2 damage, putting them down to 5, which gives me more significant draw. It gives me better draws. Now, I wouldn't have hit the draw for it. At this point, like, I could play out the Swift Spear and block, but I'm not going to break through. Like, I realistically, like, if I put them to 5, I can draw 2 burn spells and win the game. 7's a lot harder unless they tap the Ancient Tomb once. So I think as opposed to giving them an additional 5-3, which is representing 15 power on board, I was a lot better off doing 2 damage to their face and just killing their 1/1 Dork, their Mana Dork, as opposed to killing the Dryad Arbor. My concern had been is, like, with them at 6 mana, like, 6 is a lot more relevant than 5. There are things in 5 they can cast, but 6 is Primeval Titan, it's Woodland Bellower, it's, what is the Marasa thing, like the big, I don't know if people play that card anymore, but the big Eternal Witness card, it's like a 5/4 that Eternal Witnesses twice, like once it comes into play and when it dies. There's a lot of good 6-drops, I guess is my point. Like, I think even, I may be butchering this, but I'm pretty sure Rurik Thar is also a 6-drop. He may be a 7. I have to look him up. A lot of good 6-drops, though. Like, there's a lot of good 6-drops. 5 is less threatening than 6. So I kind of autopiloted on killing the Dryad Arbor. I think the right play was to put him to 5, because if they tap the Tomb at that point, like, they go to 3, which means any 3 damage burn spell, of which there are a significant number in my deck, is a game win. It also takes them off of having another 5/3, which is huge, because having 3 5/3s is pretty problematic. And one thing that Jackal Pups and Fire Drink Standards are not good at is blocking anything, because they block something that's a 5/3, and, like, I'm still taking, the 5 damage off of that. So at this point, like, I'm pretty much boxed to a point where, like, if I draw any creature, it's on chump blocking duty, and I'm kind of just having to draw burn. I draw a chump blocker, is what I draw, and I'm not going to be able to burn them out, unless, like, they significantly screw up. But, like, I kind of screwed up here. I'm like, let's go to game 3. Like, I kind of messed up in how I use that Arc Trail, I think. And, even if I manage to get lucky here, which I don't think there are draws in my deck to get me out of this, as long as they play properly in attack, which, if I was in a tournament setting, like, yeah, I'd make them show me they knew how to attack me. But, I'm not going to make them do that in a casual game. I'll go to game 3, especially considering I misplayed too. I'm like, I misplayed. Like, let's go to game 3. That was shitty play on my part. Not that, like, it's saying that, like, I would have won had I played it correctly with the Arc Trail. Probably not. I mean, with this draw, not, but I still have another turn to draw, so who knows? But probably not. I mean, at that point, if I have to have one more draw, it's going to require Price of Progress, or them tapping the Ancient Tomb to win. So, anyways, guys, that was that game. Let's go to game number 3 in this match. Alrighty, we're back, guys, for game number 3. This version also had Shrine in it. Shrine is so bad. You're going to find in this game, like, I don't even cast a Shrine because I think it's too slow. I dome for 4 here with my Vexing Devil. This hand of note does not have a permanent base threat until turn 3. I draw 1 here. I play out the Mutavault because, like, there's a chance, like, maybe I'm casting. I'm using the Mutavault to attack something like a Planeswalker. I just go ahead and blow up their Mana Dork, or their land. I Wasteland them. That was a great draw. So I'm taking them off 2 mana sources here. Like, if you can disrupt Hoof's early mana, it can really disrupt their ability to progress, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. But, like, you'll note, like, I'm not even playing the Shrine now. I think this matchup's too much of a pod race to try to equity build in Shrine. And this was one of the games, like, I was like, man, Shrine is so goddamn bad. Like, I wanted to try it in this build of Red Deck Wins, but, like, it's just not good anymore, guys. It's too slow. It's too slow for the format. It's a very good card, and I love it. But it's just too slow. Attack with everything here. Mutavault of note is every creature type because it is a changeling. Opponent makes a misplay here. Like, we talked about it afterwards. Like, and I don't like winning on this sort of thing. Like, I think the right play for them is to block the Goblin Rabblemaster. And, like, if we're playing at paper, I'd be like, hey, bud, just block the Rabblemaster. I don't think they're in a good spot regardless if they block the Rabblemaster because you're taking 5 this turn. I'm going to pump this Mutavault regardless of what happens. It puts him down to 5, virtual 3 off of the Grim Lavamancer on the next turn, with, a lot of power on board. So they're dead next turn regardless, but they make this block here, and Mutavault is, of course, an assembly worker, which Mishra's Factory is able to pump, because it's all creature types, and I'm able to get them here. Able to get the concession, but they're in a bad spot anyways. Realistically, like, we didn't win because of this misplay on our opponent's part. We won this game because we were able to blow up 2 of their lands. Their first turn land drop was killed by Searing Spear, and their dual land, the Taiga, was blown up by Wasteland, a timely draw of Wasteland. Again, Shrine of Burning Rage is just stuck in hand. I think this game, like, kind of showcases how this card is kind of aged poorly. We never really had a good time to do it. I mean, like, we could have done this, but I think at the point we were doing this, we would have given up too much tempo and too much board impact to have done it in such a way that, like, the game probably would have been vastly different. Like, i.e., if, like, we were not blowing up their land, if we were not playing out a threat, they're developing into something more powerful that is going to be much more difficult for us to kind of get around. Like, if we're allowing them to develop by not, in the case of, like, wastelanding their land or blowing up their Dried Arbor, their long game, like, their mid to long game is more powerful than mine is. So, Shrine's kind of one of those cards where, like, against decks that don't have, like, decks that have a good long game but not, like, a decisive long game like Hoof does, like a linear decisive long game like Hoof does, it's quite good. So I mean by that as, like, counterspell decks, like, just, like, control decks. Like, Shrine can be problematic. And even then, like, not all the time. Like, they have Abrupt Decay, they have Assassin's Trophy, they have a Braid, they have Kolaghan's Command. Like, there's a lot of cards that, like, incrementally deal with, like, just randomly, not incrementally, but randomly deal with artifacts. That, like, Shrine's kind of, like, just falling to the wayside. It's very slow, too. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd play it, guys. Like, it's a really cool card. Like, you still see it in Cube. Just too slow. Too slow. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game I'll be covering on Red Deck Wins. Alright, guys, we are back. Playing against Root Potato here. And never mind, this is not the deck that we're covering today, but it's a cool deck. I think actually someone wanted to see more of this, and maybe we'll cover it at some point. This is an Ephemerate, but yep, quick pause. This is the wrong one. Alright, here we go. I was one game off, so this is not Ephemerate combo. This is Red Deck Wins again. We're playing against Root Potato. Yeah, hand's good. It's got numerous 1-drops. It's got a 2-drop burn spell and a 2-drop creature that, like, can either, like, are a little more feast and famine, right? Like, a Braid is a card that, like, I think due to its flexibility you just tend to play. It's a good rate, has very high flexibility. I personally love flexible cards. I love being able to have decisions with my cards. Like, I like being able to have 2-for-1 advantage in deck building. Because, like, despite these decks being very large in size, like, honestly, they're very tight. Like, their slots are pretty tight. Like, it does get tough, I think, in a lot of these decks to really have a ton of pet cards. Like, like, I even think, like, Jackal Pup's probably getting a bit old for this deck. I still run it because it's close enough. But, like, a card like a Braid, like, the flexibility that it presents, even though it can't go to face, is quite good. And then Harsh Mentor, same thing. Like, it's kind of an overcosted thing for this deck. Like, you don't really want to be on Grizzly Bears in this deck, especially if they don't have haste. But it does enough against, like, fetch lands, etc. that, like, I think it's worth it. So this hand's fine. Like, it's perfectly fine. If it draws another land, we also have a Legion War Boss. It's got good progression. It's not a hand you toss back unless, like, it's just really bad. Like, this is a bad Jeskai hand, right? Like, if you're playing against Jeskai, you probably wouldn't want this hand, but it's fine. They haggle here. So they're playing Dredge. Like, their deck's very cool. And actually, it's kind of similar in a lot of ways to a build that I've got laying around of Dredge, except they're more all in on it. They're just going to town here, just pitching cards off. So one of the things you probably missed, they actually revealed, I believe, a Golgari Grave Troll off of this Hagel. We're just going to town. The Ash Zealot is going to be problematic for them, and just the fact that we're doing a ton of damage. They get their blood gas back. They're taking damage off Cephalid Coliseum. I just Fire Blast in response to them tapping their Cephalid Coliseum to do something. Yeah, so Red Deck wins a little bit fast for Dredge. And Dredge is kind of in a weird spot too, right? Like I really think their build is sweet. As a person who's actually like tried to build, I would say break, but like build a functioning Dredge deck, I've tended to find that like you probably need a little bit slightly higher card quality. But you can't go like all in on it. Like you have to have some madness stuff going on, some delirium stuff going on. Like you need to run like just basic good cards, like like a lightning bolt, like fatal push, stuff like that, like abrupt decay assassin's trophy. But like I had tended to find that I go into like 3 to 4 color kind of decks with it. So I do think their deck's really sweet. We played several games, but this is one of the games we played. I was like, hey, I'll throw Red Deck wins at them. Because in a way, like I think it's probably not a great matchup for the Dredge deck, but it's also kind of like a benchmark matchup, right? For like when you're building decks, like can you beat Red Deck wins? Because it's a deck that you'll see in like again any format, including this one. So we're playtesting with their deck, their Dredge deck. We playtested this one, and this first game was fairly decisive. I think it's just too much setup. For what realistically amounts to a value-oriented kind of hybrid mid-range deck. On their end, and yeah, like the linearity and like the consistency of Red Deck wins kind of just gets them here. Anyways, quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2. All right, guys, we're back. Yeah, again, this hand's fine. Like it doesn't have like I wouldn't say it's as good as the first hand I had, but I'm on the draw. And we also saw some like setup creatures as well, right? So like. They're probably going to have Hogak in their deck by this point. I know they have Hogak in their decks. They've been playing like 4 to 5 matches. And they're going to rely on other creatures. So like Grim Lavamancer kind of has some equity in the matchup. Zurgo's just a consistent clock. Keeps some chip damage on him. Then just got some burn. Like it's fine. Like it's again like we're looking for hands like this. Like it's not exceptional, but it's also not bad. And then we draw Black Lotus and do it all. Yeah. So that's also like one of the upsides. So like. I said, like, you don't need Black Lotus. You don't, but when you have it in openers, like, you get games like this, which are not good games of Magic. Like, Black Lotus never led to really anything good, let's be honest. Like, they were mistakes, but they were at the very beginning of the game. Like, what can you do? Obviously, a lot more was done right in the game because it still exists today. But, yeah, you still, like, if you have it, like, having these high roller openers is quite good. And obviously it's exacerbated more so, when you're working in a matchup that's against a deck that's more experimental, is requiring more to go right for it, has a little bit more of a long lead time in its setup to actually kind of get the value engine going and to establish board presence. It just you can high roll them out, right? Like that's just what Lotus does. It's kind of one of the things in the format. So like if this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, or if this is like your first like exposure to Canadian Highlander, like just know that's a thing. Like, you can get high rolled out in this format. Like, it's an eternal format. Anyways, like, I think after drawing that, like, the game's kind of over. They play out a Golgari Thug, which is a fine card, but it's going to get stomped here by my top deck. Giant. They draw Creeping Chill, which is actually pretty good here, because it's going to give them another turn, I think. I'm not likely to get to Barbarian Ring territory. I just go ahead and Wild Slash their face here. Draw a land, which is not really what I was hoping for, but, like, I've had very good draws so far, drawing Lotus and the Giant. They play out their Haunted Dead. I go ahead and attack with all. I think it's a forced block here. Play out a Mishra's Factory, so they're pretty dead next turn. They reanimate the Icarid. Dredge again. Desperate Ravings. Don't find what they need, I don't think. And go ahead and pack in the game. So, Red Deck Wins kind of does what it does here. Like, it's... there's a few decks that act as like a policing force, I think, on the format, or at least kind of set the speed limit, right? Or are like litmus tests. Like Jeskai is one of them. Like Jeskai mid-range, which I have covered. So if you're interested in like what that deck's about, If you don't already know, go check that deck tech out, that video out. It's a little older, but it's a good deck. This deck, and then I would say like the hardcore combo decks, like your Storm, your Time Vault Control. I think those style of decks kind of set the expectation management, like the metering when you're building, of how fast do I have to be or how disruptive do I have to be, right? I either need to be faster or more disruptive. So yeah, this matchup kind of goes how you'd expect it to go. Like it's tough. Like Dredge requires a lead time of 2 to 3 turns, probably more than like Red Deck Wins does, and we attack their life points directly over the course of 3 to 4 turns, and that just tends to win games. Now that said, we got basically a turn 6 concession here. We got crippling chill, I want to say, in this game, and that did stop us. Like it actually was a full swing of 2 turns for us, but we fished out pretty effectively, I think, at turn 4 in game 1, which is about where you want to be. Anyways, guys, quick pause. Back momentarily with more gameplay of Red Deck Wins. All right, guys, we're back playing against Jackie the Puppet here. Hand's fine. 1 drop, 2 drops. Not the best, not the worst. Deathrite Shaman. Just gonna get that out of the way. I don't want them to develop their mana. I get Inquisitioned here. They take my Ash Zealot. I just go ahead and Bolt Face here. That's pretty aggressive. If they have like a Liliana, I could be in trouble. Liliana Last Hope would be very bad for me. But I kind of actually I think I have a very good read here. So I developed this Fanatical Firebrand. I do not develop the Viashino Pyromancer here. I developed the first one because I kind of want to see what they'll do. Because they know I have the Viashino Pyromancer, and I kind of want to see if they'll counter my Fanatical Firebrand and get my attack step in. I have a pretty strong feeling with how they've used their mana over these first couple turns. It feels very likely that they have a Toxic Deluge in hand. I don't know why, but I had that read, that tingle or whatever you want to call it. So I don't actually develop my Viashino Pyromancer, which would be a standard kind of development here. I feel like all it's going to be is a 2-mana shock here if I do it. And they do nothing. So I'm like, alright. And they Tainted Pact. And they Tainted Pact for Toxic Deluge. And I'll tell you right now, that's what it was. It's either that or Damnation, but it's one of the two. Yeah, it's Toxic Deluge. So they wipe my board. I'm like, okay. Stinks. I draw another mountain. I'm like, oof. Not good, but I got him to 10. I could draw Price of Progress, or really, most threats would be good here. Incinerate, also a very good draw. I get to knock out this Liliana Heretical Healer, which is a life-linking thing, which is generally not good for us. They draw explosives, blow up my Viashino. They have access to blowing up my Viashino Heretic. I draw another land, and I'm kind of disappointed in that. They just blow up the explosives here. They've got an active Ancestral Vision. I believe it has 2 counters left. Or is it 3? 3. They play Tezzeret, find a Time Vault, and I'm dead next turn. I draw another land, and I go ahead and pack it in. So we lose to blue-black Time Vault. Deck looks pretty interesting. It's got some interesting cards in it. I did not think this was a Vault deck when I saw Liliana Heretical Healer, but it's interesting, kind of hedge against, aggressive decks like this. So, not a bad include. Maybe, in a more aggressive metagame, this is, 100% right. Like this, and, I'm assuming they're playing this card mostly for its Vampire Nighthawk-like abilities. So, yeah, anyways, we ended up losing this first one. They get a Time Vault. We had Bupkis in hand. We drew too many lands. Is basically what it was. That's why I play 28 in this deck, because you don't want to flood. Flooding is kind of bad in a deck that has very high card efficiency and very low card economy, i.e. Red Deck Wins, Alrighty, guys, we are back for game number 2 against Jackie. Hand's great. It could be better. There's a question as to whether I want to play out the Ruby on turn 1 to fade, an Inquisition of Kozilek. I think it's fine to get this Ruby Inquisition of Kozilek, though, or to rest. Because I'm just going to be playing the Stormblood Berserker anyways next turn. So it doesn't really represent the loss of casting anything unless I draw a 1-drop specifically. Which I do, but it's not really a 1-drop. Goblin Bushwhacker is really a 2-drop if you're using it well. I play out my 3/3 Menache and get in 3 damage off of the Rift Bolt as well. OP plays Fetch Land out, down to 16 already, which is good. They bounce my my Stormblood Berserker. At this point, I could Skullcrack them, or I could... or I could cast out the Goblin Bushwhacker. Now I just cast out the Bushwhacker to dome them for 2 after they Force of Negation. Because I'm going to want to be able to get in damage next turn to be able to play out this Stormblood Berserker as a 3/3. So that's kind of the reason I do it there. Like, I am losing some equity if I draw more creatures later. You don't tend to want to have to do that. They do not have a counter, which is interesting. Or they have a mana leak specifically. So I suppose I could have played around mana leak specifically there and forced them not to use their mana, but like I think it's fine to cast it out there. Draw a Lightning Bolt. So we're getting in for 4. They're down to 9. Virtual 6. Not bad, not bad. They play out a Cryptic Command here to tap my team. I could bolt here. I don't opt to bolt here. There's things they could possibly do, like play on a Tezzeret, and then find a Time Vault, and maybe I want to vault at that point. Play on a Narset, and maybe I want to bolt her. They end up finding Muddle the Mixture, which means they do have access to a Time Vault at the cost of all their mana, basically. So they have to basically tap down 3 lands to transmute Muddle the Mixture, find the Time Vault, pay 2 to cast the Time Vault, which ties up all their mana excepting 1. If they had the key in hand, they could play the key, but they don't have the extra mana to actually untap the vault. So they are a little mana short. They do find Manifold Key, so they transmute, play out the vault, or play out Search for Azcanta. So next turn they have lethal, but they're basically tapped out. I can play around most counter spells they're able to cast on 1, except like Dispel maybe. Put them at a 3, hit them for 3 with the bolt, and get there. I think there's a possibility that, some folks may have bolted the Narset there. I think this is one of those games, especially knowing they're on a Vault deck at this point, you really want to look for opportunities to end the game, because they do have a game-winning combo. It might as well be Tendrils of Agony for 100. If they can continue to twiddle on a Time Vault, you're never taking another turn, so the game is over. So yeah, I think there was a possibility that, some folks may have thought, bolting the Narset was correct. I think in that game state, you definitely want to look just to win, because, I'm, in general, not beating a Vault once it resolves. You could put cards, you really need instant speed cards to deal with Vault. I do have a Braid in the deck, but outside of that, Fiery Confluence is not good against Vault decks. It's good against, Academy decks, for blowing up artifacts, or, Artifact aggro decks, if you're looking to specifically blow up artifacts. But against Vault, Vault, unless someone's playing it, no offense, but probably suboptimally. You generally don't want to have it on the board until you want to have it on the board, if you know what I mean. You want to have it down to win. So yeah, here we were able to kind of find a win and get to a game 3. But this was actually a fairly close game. I did kind of flood out a little bit again, but we were able to kind of cinch it. They had a win on the following turn, had there been a following turn. So die roll was very important here. Obviously, we were going to have the die roll because we lost the first game, but if it had been a game 1, the die roll would have been very relevant here. They probably would have had the win. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3 against Jackie the Puppet on UB Time Vault. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Hand looks perfectly acceptable. Also has a Wasteland, which is kind of nice. They cast down an Executioner's Capsule, which is kind of an interesting include. I don't think it's bad. It's a little spicy, but I don't think it's bad. It's kind of nice to have, a tutorable creature removal spell for, all of your artifact tutors in a Time Vault deck. Seems good to me. Knowing myself, I'm going to Wasteland here, force them to use their removal, and then play another 1-drop. Yeah, I don't mind that. It's not great, but it's fine. They play on a tapped land, which means to me they're probably out of lands in hand, which is good. That means I'm probably winning right now. Well, they either drew a land or they had another land. Because oftentimes you don't want to play Mystic Sanctuary out if you don't have to. Now, Liliana Heretical, or the Last Hope, is very good against this deck. I just go ahead and kill it on board. I could have Bone Crusher Gianted it. I think I'd rather say Bone Crusher Giant. It feels pretty obvious that they have, some sort of counterspell or interaction, like a kill spell. So I'm going to leave open the option to play a 1-drop after they do whatever they're going to do to my thing. They do something to my thing. I believe I go ahead and just play out one of these 2/2s, or 2-power attackers, rather. They remand my 2-power attacker. It's fine. I think casting out the Bone Crusher there was kind of crazy, or, the Legion War Boss just felt too obvious to me that, they had something. They had 2 things, evidently. They go ahead and try to hand attack us and gain some life and kill our thing. which is fine. I have 2/2 drop. I don't have any sorceries or instants in hand, or at least cards that don't operate as them when they're in hand. I go ahead and Bone Crusher. I 2-for-1 myself, but like they're down on cards right now. Bone Crusher, this Life Linker. They're still at 14, but like I still have a ton of cards in hand, and I have this Bone Crusher, which is provided me some card advantage here. So they do have a Time Vault now, which is probably the part of the reason they kept this hand. Not that their hand was bad per se, but it was a little bit mana light. It was very It was very disruptive, but it obviously didn't have like in hand a way to find the other half of a combo. So there's probably some hope in like getting that. Maybe they drew the Time Vault late too, though. Who knows? I'm just playing things out and smash. I'm fishing at this point. Like we've basically gotten their hand expent. I still have resources left over, which is kind of like how I was playing this match. I'm like, all right, have the next thing, have the next thing, have the next thing. All right, I've got 2 to 3 things left. My last things are going to kill you. And I think they concede the game here because they're dead on the next turn. They actually concede here, and that ends up being the game. So basically, like they were put in a position where like you need to find your key, one of your keys, or a way to find your key and have 1 mana left over to untap the Time Vault with your key, and then you can win. Or have a way to clear the board, which at this point would buy them another draw step, but like puts them down to 4 because this Orcish Hellraiser is going to do 2 to them. And then I'd be playing Bone Crusher out, which still puts them to dead on the turn after that. So it also depends on what I drew. I mean, I could draw a 4 damage burn spell as well. So anyways, guys, that was our gaming experience against Blue-Black Vault. Honestly, like fairly close matchup. Like Grixis Vault, I think is probably the best version of Vault, and like I do tend to think that like that deck plays a pretty good game against Red Deck Wins. I think it's a little die rolly. I think Red Deck Wins is still favored against. Don't get me wrong. Although, I mean, I think, like, it's balanced by the fact that, like, Grixis Vault is better against, like, hoof and, like, mid-range decks than, like, Red Deck Wins is, right? So, well, I do think Red Deck Wins is favored in it. I don't think it's unwinnable for a Vault deck. As you saw, I mean, they won Game 1. Having this sort of very powerful, like, I win button in your deck that is very cheap. It essentially operates as a cheaper, less interactive variety of twin combo. In your deck is very good. Come to find out, right? Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily with more gameplay of Red Deck Wins. Hey, guys, we're back. We're going to be playing against Luca here on a Graveyard Matters deck. That hand had no lands in it, so it was unkeepable. Had a lot of good cards in it, though. This hand, 2 1-drops, one that gets better with another one that's attacking on the first turn. See Forest. Luca is known to play a variety of decks, but they tend to be like creature-oriented, hybrid mid-range decks, hybrid combo like mid-range decks. So like Kiki-Jiki stuff. Also, a big fan of playing a Madness deck, which I killed out Looter because I'm pretty sure I'm playing against Madness here. They play on an Anjay, and I'm like, ooh, that card could be really bad for me. But I'm actually going to be able to kill that Anjay if they block at all. They do not, of note. They get just the win, knock out my Rigging Runner, get a Blood Mad Vampire, 4-1, and I think say go. No, they play a Hollow One out. Had a very powerful turn. I play out a Grim Lavamancer, play out my Rigging Runner, just a block, honestly. At this point, what I'm looking to do is try to, like, kill them with Burn. I take the damage here, because I figure, like, that thing can trade. My Rigging Runner can at least trade with the Blood Mad Vampire. Now, I attack with all here. What I'm looking to see if they'll do is, like, if they'll block everything. They do, which makes sense. But I'm going to go ahead and Brute Force on the Rigging Runner to kill the Anjay. They go ahead and discard the Vidia Seer, which is basically a Sindbad. They're still at 5, but now they're kind of put in a position where they need to present more blockers. They can, which is good. It's good for them. I draw a Wasteland, blow up one of their lands. I don't think it really matters here, though. I just force an attack here because I can't block with Zergo, so it's better just to get the card off the board, and I don't think they'll be likely to take the damage because it puts them at 3, which generally tends to be bad range against Burn. Down to 8. So actually a pretty tight race here. I think I'm actually dead on the next turn. But I draw Skullcrack, and, not that like that was like a highly great. It was a draw that won the game, but I mean, there's a lot of draws in my deck from that point that win the game. With them at 5, with 2 damage in hand, down to 3. So I like how my opponent played the game. This is one of the graveyard decks that I'm more familiar with outside of the Dredge deck that we saw. Like one of the more I don't want to say traditional because like this is even kind of a cool, like kind of more experimental deck, I would say. It's done well. I mean, it has some pedigree, at least in the online meta. I know Luca's done pretty well with this deck. I think they've actually won like 10th point events, which is an MTGO player-run event. That a guy named the Red Mage runs on a weekly basis. Actually, I think it's firing up again tomorrow. So yeah, the deck has done well historically. They put a lot of time into this deck, and obviously it was actually a pretty close race. Like, I had a top deck here at the end, but again, red deck wins. Consistent. Like, if all you need to do is 3, like, you're a top deck away from winning the game. And we managed to take this one here off of Luca, and on to game 2 against their Madness Brew. All right, guys, we're back for game number 2 against Luca on their Madness Brew. Hand again is fine. I'm not going to have a ton of ways of interacting with their engine outside of, like, the looter-style creatures. The looter creatures I can kill, and I will, because I know the looter creatures are very dangerous in their deck. Like Wharf Infiltrator, auto-kill. Like, just going to kill that thing. I use a Forked Bolt here. There's a chance that, like, I maybe want to save that, but I think the fact that Pillar can do a little bit more versus more cards is probably better. The big Game Hunter's fine. If they want to block just to chump and save some damage, they can. I'm not going to throw the Jackal Pup into it yet. If they don't develop their board further on this turn, I probably will get rid of it. Yeah, I just opt to. I could have just thrown the Jackal Pup out, but I'd rather see if I get 4 damage out of it here. I go ahead and find my land, play out my 1-drop. So like that light up the stage worked out perfectly. Hit my land drop for the turn and also got another 1-drop. They have a Volcanic Eruption, which is able to board wipe me, which is pretty good. I just go ahead and get 3 in off of the Hellspark Elemental Unearthed, and I've got lethal next turn off not Chain Lightning, but Lightning Strike and Skullcrack. If I hit a land, I have double lethal. They play on a hollow one at retail price, basically. I just go ahead and kill him. I stun on him a little bit. I cast both these spells. So yeah, managed to get him here, and that's it for this game, guys. This match. I'm gonna try to find a couple more games for you, and then we'll probably go ahead and call the video. Probably 2 more. I'll see if I can find 2 more. But yeah, quick pause. All right, guys, we're back. We're playing against Nathaniel Prosdick here. Also a YouTuber. So they're playing. So we were doing some significant playtesting with their shell. During this, and like we probably had like 10 to 15 games between the deck I'm on and then their deck, and they were doing successive or kind of like iterative processes in building their deck over the course of it. And they're playing like an Oath, 5-color Oath deck, which I think in general, like red deck wins is pretty good against. Or at a minimum, like they're put in a spot where like they need to mulligan very aggressively to get after their combo. Because like Oath, if it goes off early enough and they have the right targets, which their deck does, to beat an aggressive deck like this deck, it tends to be good enough, right? If they don't have that and they have to kind of like fart around for a bit and play the control game, it tends to be a little too slow though. So I think it's actually a tougher matchup for them. But they wanted to play this matchup a significant bit because I think it was kind of a weakness they were kind of seeing in their deck, and they wanted to go through the iterative process of playing against a lot of like aggressive style decks, which I wouldn't say this is the fastest build of red deck wins, but it's pretty quick, right? Speaking of quick, this is my opening hand in this game. It's pretty good, right? It's got a Lotus. It's got something to do with all the mana, and I'm not going to say no to it, even though I'm on the draw here, which kind of stinks. Wasteland, perfectly fine by me. Not looking to play a lot of non-basics. If I play the non-basic that I've got, I'll be playing it after all this. Because it's not an island, I actually don't. Because their Wasteland's not an island, I don't opt to play around days there. I sequence out a little differently than I normally would. I play the Chrome Box out because I don't think it's going to bear any relevance in this game, and I want to get the Prowess trigger. They go ahead and Tithe here. They have a Balance, which wipes my board, but like they're already down to 4 life here because Black Lotus is a card, and it's not going to take a lot for me to like draw something that'll just kill them. They could Wasteland me here, but I guess they do, so they're not too concerned about. I guess they're concerned a little bit about my mana. And actually here it's a little irrelevant. Like my deck's very efficient, but I draw one of my spells I can't cast with only 2 lands. But if I draw a land, I have them at lethal. I draw Eidolon, just cast it out because I assume that's going to preclude them from casting most of their spells. And they agree. I go ahead and pack it in. But that's a Black Lotus game, so we end up getting that one. Quick pause, be back momentarily for game number 2. Alright guys, we're back. This hand's acceptable. It's not great. Fanatical Firebrand actually is kind of randomly, like, incidentally good against Oath. You don't see a ton of Oath decks in this format. Codex is a little slow. And, it lacks a little bit of the strategic range that like some of the other best decks can have. Nate's a diehard control player. I'm not saying they're not capable of playing anything else, but I think they tend to enjoy playing control. It's kind of their milieu. So they're playing like a big mana version of the deck right now. So they play out this Mishra's Workshop, a bunch of mana. We could be looking to get set up with balance here, which is kind of what I'm thinking. But like, I can't do much about it. I can throw my burn at face here, which is kind of what I opt to do. I get mana drained here. I'm like, all right. I possibly should have just thrown Wild Slash at face. I'm just trying to get cards out of my hand as fast as I can, because it feels like a balance, right? Instead, what it is, I believe, is a massive creature, which is pretty funny. So they mana drain. I mean, they probably would have been able to cast this thing anyway. So it's Wargate for a massive creature. So Sphinx of the Steel Wind is, unless I draw like exactly Price of Progress, I'm not going to win this game. More than likely. I mean, I'll play my threats out, but they're not getting through the Sphinx of the Steel Wind. Which, I mean, I can't complain. This is a worthy way to die. I go ahead and pack it in here. Sphinx of the Steel Wind, turboed out. Yep, too good for this deck to beat. Again, I suppose I could have waited it out one more turn, but Price of Progress is not getting better over time. Unless they fetch... They can't fetch back. They can't play enough lands each turn, given what they have. They don't have a fast bottom play. To make price relevant against, a 6 life point swing every turn. So basically it was do or die time for me. Like if I drew a Price of Progress there over Incinerate, I can possibly win that. It also depends on how they block. Like if they blocked, this thing have first strike? Yeah, that's first strike too, shit. Like one of the trickier things you could do, I mean technically they're at 6 because of the Fanatical Firebrand. One of the trickier things you can do if this thing did not have first strike is attack in, hope they didn't block the first striker, get the first strike's damage on first, then cast pop in response before lifelink happened, like against like Wormcoil Engine. Most savvy players are going to block the Rigging Runner in that case because they don't want the damage to occur. I always want to say stack, but they don't want it to occur before regular combat damage has been done, which can help augment casting of instants to get lethal. But anyway, the long and short of this game is they turboed out their hand, and they had access to an early Sphinx of the Steel Wind, and won the game very decidedly by using it. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3. All right, guys, we're back for game number 3 against Nate here. Hand's fine. This is back when I was still playing Lotus Petal, but I kind of started thinking about it more. I think this is actually pre-points changes as well, before Yawgmoth caught a point. I do play out the Lotus in a random event here. Actually, I played out main 1 just to get the buff on it. I cast Skewer, second main, just to get damage in. Opponent plays out a Sol Ring. Good card. This Lava Dart's kind of interesting with Barbarian Ring, because, I mean, it does kind of help fuel my graveyard up a little bit. Skullcrack is just fine. Cast the Dart out, get him down to 12. Cast Dart back again to get a Prowess trigger. Cast out Skullcrack to get another Prowess trigger, get him down to 8. Hit them for 7. They're down to 1. And they basically have to deal with my board this turn or they die. Play out a bunch of stuff. Oko. So they cast out an Oko. And yeah, that's just game. Control is interesting, right? One of the things I really didn't say, in the philosophy behind Red Deck Wins, for longtime players, a lot of the stuff doesn't need to be said, guys, but, for folks who are newer to the format, or maybe even newer to Magic, because this format appeals to a lot of different people, the real strength behind, Red Deck Wins is not, just its speed, it's fast, right? It's a fast deck, but, Storm's fast, White Weenie is pretty fast, maybe a turn slower, but it's still fast. Really the strength behind Red Deck Wins and why red cards generally speaking don't have as many card advantage type abilities printed on them is that they represent a ton of flexibility, right? When you're able to have your removal represent as a clock as well as removal, you're kind of getting deck building advantage. And that's really the strength of a deck like Jeskai too. Jeskai is a deck that's really strong, in my opinion. The blue and white cards are good in Jeskai, but what distinguishes Jeskai from other blue decks and its ability to beat aggressive decks like Red Deck Wins or Death and Taxes is not the blue and white cards, it's the red cards. Red cards are really good at, either they're very flexible. They present clock or they present board control. And here you kind of see the ability of the cards to just represent pure speed, because we're kind of racing, right? I don't want my opponent's long game is very good. It's Sphinx of the Steel Wind, it's Imperium Archangel, it's Dramoka, it's just big dumbs that my deck never beats. And here, like, having the flexibility in those cards, like, I mean, Skullcrack's just Skullcrack, but, like, Skewer can go to target. Like, this card, Lava Dart, is intended, it's really templated against creatures, but there's some equity built into it with the prowess creatures is kind of showcased here. Like, it's a lot of prowess. Like, it represented basically Lightning Bolt. Actually represented 4 damage in combination with the Monastery Mentor. Monastery Swift Spear. But here, like, there's like these interactive cards that I have in my deck that are templated against other decks also represent Clock, which is like really like the inherent advantage that like red deck win style decks, red cards have, and why in general you don't see like card draw printed on them. And when you do, it tends to be really good, right? Like Smuggler's Copter, busted. Experimental Frenzy, busted card, busted deck. Not played in this deck because I'm not going that big. I don't want to go that long, and we're in Eternal format. The format's quick. Like, we're just faster than that. But regardless, it's still a very busted card in a standard rotation. You look at cards like the Spectacle card I'm running in this deck that draws me 2 cards. Puts 2 cards in exile, I can play them until end of my next turn. Very, very good. Like, when you start putting that effect on red cards. Because they're already that flexible. They present clock and they present board control. They just have a very high flexibility. So anyways, we end up getting the Oath deck here, despite, some pretty good early acceleration. A little bit of trouble in the mana department. Not enabling them to get down the Oko, on curve. They're a turn off here. I guess, no, this is turn 3. Never mind, they have an on-curve Oko. Post Impulse. So Oko's still good, but like just not fast enough, right? Yeah. Yep. All right, guys, quick pause. I'm going to try to do one more game. Let me go and take a quick look. It's kind of crazy. I start going through games. I realize how many of these games I play with how many different decks I play. And it's kind of hard to keep track of. But I'm going to try to find one more game I play with red deck wins here so we can showcase enough matchups of the deck. For some folks, veterans of the format, it may not be that interesting to watch red deck wins operate. It does what it does. But for folks who are newer to it or haven't seen how this deck operates specifically in this format, hopefully it's at least enlightening or interesting. And even that said, like, there's a lot of flexibility in the build too, right? Like, I think there's a couple ways to build this deck and still have it be very successful. This is just one of the ways. Quick pause. Be back momentarily, guys. All right, guys. Last game we're playing against Nathan Leapitz here. So I had him all look in the first hand. I think I'm going to keep this as a 6er. It does not embrace card advantage very well, but it's pretty quick. It only has 1 permanent source of damage, but I think it's probably worth keeping. Also, Shard Volley is a good thing to put under a Chrome Mox in the case of this hand. There's not a very high chance that I'm probably going to just play out the Chrome Mox here. I'm going to look for a better target for it or look to see if I need to use it. I just go ahead and get this Noble Hierarch out of the way, attack for 2. They're playing, I believe, a hoof deck, but I forget here. Some sort of green deck. Get it for 4 off of the land. They play Rex Sage out, blow up my Chrome Box. It's fine. Like, it's not great for me, but it's also just fine. I'm kind of hoping to draw a land there. I blow up the Reclamation Sage because I want to leave the lane open to attack with my Mutavault. I also don't want to have my Mutavault get killed in blocks if I just opt to try to trade in attacks. Because I want to be able to Fiery Confluence if I hit lands. Which, lands are still, like, despite being a land-lean deck, still the highest percentage draw. I'm attacking here because I actually want to pass damage to make Fiery Confluence lethal if the game goes long, because they're playing a hoof-style deck, and they're going to have blockers over time, so, like, Suicide attacking my things in there to get factors of 2 damage in is actually not bad. They double block here. I think this double block's a little bit greedy. I think, in general, you'd want to generally use the Vizier, but they're looking to, I guess, get me. Attack for 3 here. I'm hoping for any land. To see if maybe I can pull this out. I am able to deal with the Scavenging Ooze and get them for 1 damage. I don't have an attack here. The Courser's going to gain them a life back up to 8, so I'm pretty much out of draws here. Homeward Path is not one you commonly see anymore. Very cool card, though. They played on a 5-power attacker. This Wayward Swordtooth is kind of a cool card. You don't see it as much anymore, but it's pretty sweet. It allows you to play multiple different cards a turn. I'm very dead here, so like I was like in my head, I'm like, oh, I can stop life gain. I can basically put them to 6, but I'm dead to the crackbacks. I get hit for 5, 8, plus I can't block anything except for the Arbor Elf, so I get hit for 4, 5. It's 9 plus 3, 12. Take 2 off for the Sulfuric Vortex on the next upkeep, down to 0. I'm dead. We could also like just leave up the Mutavault, but then I'm back a Mana Source. I'm kind of hoping to mise out a Black Lotus to cast the Fiery Confluence, which would assume that they attack with everything and do not leave back a blocker of any sort for the Zergo Bellstriker, but I know they're drawing a 2-2, which is going to have Summoning Sickness. So they're going to have a blocker regardless, and they're probably going to block. So I'm pretty dead here. So end up losing to Hoof here in game number 1, and we're going to go to game number 2. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2. Alrighty, guys, we're back. This hand is acceptable, but I don't know. Like I feel like I could have done better. Yeah, I probably could have mulliganed this one. Like, I think you kind of want to have burn, like some interactive burn in the early game against Hoof. This hand does present pressure pretty well, though. I mean, I'm obviously going to attack here. Probably just play out the Vishinu Pyromancer. I can see playing out the Young Pyromancer, though. I really don't mind if Young Pyromancer trades with, like, the elves here, the Finhorn elves. They blow up my Ice-Hide Golem. That is one downside to playing Ice-Hide Golem. Now, this is an interesting draw. Like, now, like, I actually have pretty good late-game potential. Again, like, I just trade off here because I don't want them to have creatures. Like, them having creatures on board builds equity in, like, Shrine, Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, Gaia's Cradle, Growing Rites of Immelthok, which some decks still play. I cast out the Fiery Confluence here. I have to kill my own Vishinu Pyromancer, but I clear their board. Put them down to 2 Mana Source, which is a pretty big game against them. They play out Scavenging Ooze, which is really bad for me, and I'm hoping to draw a 3 damage burn spell. If I don't, they'll probably win the game. I believe I don't this turn. So, like, I'm kind of in a rough spot here. I play this out. They don't opt to take 4. Which I don't know if that's correct or not. I mean, like, now, like, they're kind of put in a spot where, like, they want to leave up Scavenging Ooze, but they don't. They go ahead and gain some life here up to 4. They're not incentivized to really block the Vexing Devil here. That was a hell of a draw. So I'm going to go ahead and play out my Monastery Spear, blow up the Scavenging Ooze, get 2 Prowess triggers on both my things, and slam into them for 8 total damage down to 4. So they can't take a draw off Sylvan Library anymore, and I have very lethal on the board, and they go ahead and pack it in. So, like, Ooze is one of those cards that, like, is really, it's a format staple. Like, I think almost every green deck that's out there plays it because it's so good. It's just good against graveyard decks, good against the aggressive decks, good against storm decks. Like, it's just good against so many things in the format that, like, it tends to be a staple. But one of the challenges with it is, like, you know, it's kind of a challenging card from the standpoint that when you're playing in this matchup right here, especially if your mana has been disrupted in a way that, like, you know, like their early mana dorks were kind of just blown up and they were a little stymied on mana development. A deck that requires a lot of mana, Hoof specifically, they're put in a position where, like, if they're developing further cards out, they're not using the Scavenging Ooze to gain life and also gain a threat that is increasing over time and making it more difficult for me to attack. You know, as the case may be, like in this case, they play out the Sylvan Library, which is a good investment card, but is a pure investment card. Does absolutely nothing the turn it comes into play. You know, outside of like tying up 1 green mana that could have represented more life gain. In this case, would have put it outside of Exquisite Firecraft range. I'm not saying their play was wrong to play on the Sylvan Library. It was actually right because the thing didn't die the turn prior, so it's not likely that I have a way to deal with it, especially if it's going up to 4. As it turned out, though, I drew it and, you know, managed to get through, right? So it you know, it was challenging. They were taking 4 regardless off the Vexing Devil. But you can see like the parasitic effects of Scavenging Ooze, especially in a contended matchup, can also have relevant impacts because here like they wanted to develop, but it also takes them off of using it as well. Which is one of the things that like I'm trying to attack and Red Deck wins is like trying to basically tie up their actions, basically force plays out of my opposition by how fast I'm presenting threats that are trying to end the game. Right, so. Yep. Anyways, managed to get this one. Mostly on the back of Fiery Confluence. I think did a lot of lifting here. Despite some setbacks. Got 2 for 1 on the Ice-Hide Golem. Pretty big setback. And, you know, managed to rip like a champ and put them on a 2-turn clock despite kind of being in a bad position on board with the Scavenging Ooze. So, pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. Alright, guys. We're back for game number 3. This hand is risky. I'm on the draw, though. Like, I keep this on the draw, and I get paid off. Like, I'm still a 28 land deck. Like, yeah. I mean, I'm more than 28 mana sources, though, because I'm playing the Moxen, the Black Lotus, etc. Like, I have a solid 31 mana sources in deck. So, like, I think this is an acceptable risk, and I had a lot of 1-drops in hand. I also had interactive cards. They play on a Garruk here, but I'm going to be able to blow this beast up with the Bolt, and then get in to kill the Garruk with one of my 2-power attackers. what my hope is here, because they're kind of down, they're down to 4 mana. I'm going to put them on the back heel, or the back foot here. I've taken up 2 of their mana on the following turn. They're going to play out a bunch of dorks. Now, this Arc Trail is going to be big because I can blow up all of their stuff, right? I go ahead and Arc Trail all of this nonsense. I actually don't kill the Ley Druid. I actually wanted to see if they'll block here. I make a play error here, though. Like, I should have played out the Lotus and just got an additional buff on the Monastery Swift Spear, and played the Sulfuric Vortex out. Part of me kind of wanted to see what they would do, if they would block or not. I think that was kind of my decision cycle. I was like, I kind of want to see what they'll do. Like, I want to see if they'll block. If they didn't block, like, I think it changes what I do with my Black Lotus. Like, i.e., do I blow up the Ley Druid, or do I play the Sulfuric Vortex out? So I don't think... That play's actually interesting, right? Like, I think the level 1, like, just, I want to fish my deck as fast as I can and play it as optimally, like, given, no consideration to what my opponent's doing, which is level 1 play. Like, folks will hear level 1 play, and, like, I guess I'm caveating my language. They use, like, level 1 play does not mean you're playing badly. It means you're playing your cards, like, basically face up. Like, you're just like, I'm just playing as quick as I can. I'm playing optimally with what I have to maximize my plan, which in this case is just damage. So the level 1 play on my last turn, which it looks suboptimal because I'm playing spells that would have buffed my Monastery Swift Spear in second main. The reason I did that, though, I lost out basically on 2 damage, is because I kind of wanted to see if they'd block with this Ley Druid, and if they didn't block with the Ley Druid, they'd, one, be at a lower life total, and they'd be at a lower life total, right? And I actually may want to play out the Black Lotus main 2 and Bone Crusher Giant their Ley Druid. I could have done that main 1, just blown up their Ley Druid main 1 so they didn't have the option to block, which in some ways could have been stronger. But I felt like Sulfuric Vortex, like, I feel like the highest upside play over time is probably Sulfuric Vortex. But I also didn't want them to have this around. So really I was doing it as a bid for information on what the remainder of their hand looked like. As the case was, they had Scavenging Ooze, which is a strong reason to have blocked with Ley Druid, because you can get this down and gain some incremental life and block my stuff. Sulfuric Vortex invalidates that, which is kind of what I was hoping to do. If they have like a Kitchen Finks, a land, Green Sun Zenith into Finks, Ancient Tomb into Thragtusk, or City of Traders into Thragtusk. City of Traders sees less play, though. Any of those lines are Scavenging Ooze here. Like, any of those lines kind of help kind of, take away from the incremental gains that I've made in the early to mid game here, and kind of wipe them away. And my cards, like I said, don't really get better over time, so like I really need to cement those early gains that I make. And Sulfuric Vortex is a card that still does that, has for a long time, and probably I hope will continue to for a while as well. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut this video there. This is a longer one. Hopefully, hopefully you can follow everything. Like I said, I'm getting over kind of some illness, so I may not be functioning at top levels right now. But I think this is a deck that was definitely worth covering, even though it's a fairly basic deck. It's fairly simple. Some folks will talk crap on Red Deck Wins. It's a format. It's an archetype that's defining in the format. It is kind of a policing deck of the format. It's a metric by which you should build decks, or at least have consideration for in your deck building choices. And that sometimes may mean you just don't consider it because it's not something that you're going to see in the metagame you're playing in, where you're at. But it's a deck that is a top performer, right? And it tends to be in most formats. So yeah, very, very good deck. A lot of different builds of it, but I think this is a good build. So if you were interested in playing the format, or maybe you're even a longtime veteran and you haven't played a lot of aggressive decks or Red Deck Win style decks, pick it up, guys. It's a really a fun deck to play too. Like I enjoy playing a lot of different varieties of archetypes. My least favorite's probably like big mana decks. Like I'm not a big hoof or academy person. I have them built. I play them from time to time, but they're not go-to decks for me because really for them it's like there's not a ton of... I don't find there's as many judgment-based decisions. They're a little more linear. Whereas I find like on Red Deck Wins, it's a little more incremental. So like there's a lot more judgment decisions in it. In Storm's actually a very interactive deck in this format, which is funny to say, but it's very interactive. So like I have fun playing that. It's also density-based combos. So there's a lot of like incremental decisions that get made along the way. So like those kind of decks I enjoy. Like Time Vault decks, like 2-card combo decks don't really tend to do it for me. And then big mana decks don't. I also don't think they're as good as this deck either. I mean, Time Vault is. Time Vault's on the same level as I think Red Deck Wins is. But yeah, I think like at the end of the day, like if you want a top performing, consistent deck, and possibly like you haven't played a lot of this style of deck, like it's a fun deck to play, give it a shot, and or if you are very interested in the format, you want to play a competitive deck, like you have a more of a spiky side, let's say, or just you're the sort of person who learns best when they're like reinforced at least 50% with winning, because you'll win a lot of free games with Red Deck Wins. That's just how the deck functions, how it has functioned over time. Since it was developed by a guy named Rob Sly, and the mana curve was found out in Magic Theory land. But yeah, I mean like it's a deck that I think for either longtime players or brand new players has something to offer. It does require type play. Like sometimes you will get free games, especially if you're playing a Lotus version. But you also need to play it well too. Like there's a lot of interesting decisions you can make in the deck, decision trees. It's incremental in nature. It's not all at once. Like it may seem like it is, but I think the deck gets a lot of undue crap against it for very little reason. Yeah, I'll let this game play out, but like I think we won this one. I don't know if it's actually over yet. But opponent plays a Scavenging Ooze, and like it blocks my stuff, but like I'm gonna Bone Crush here and get a boost on my my Monastery Swiftspear. Hit him for 2 down to 7. Their Ooze is gone. I mean, I 2 for 1 myself there, kind of, because Bone Crusher really is kind of just a free spell, right? Because I still have a big thing I can cast later on if I want to. They play their land out, but they don't have a relevant play. They're down to 5. They're taking, they can't gain life, and I've got an onboard threat. They don't, etc., etc. Like, the game's just over. So anyways, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. I enjoyed doing this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. A simpler deck, but, I think a deck that's certainly worth covering at some point in time, and I haven't covered it yet, so I want to do it. All right, guys, enjoy and take care now.